Back in the day, there was this super gnarly demon threatening the whole empire. The dude couldn't stand any living thing, and his power could have leveled the entire freaking world. That's when this saint showed up, someone who could actually talk to demons. She saves the empire and finds the love of her life, for real. But her future's looking dark thanks to this villain, the ex-saint, Thisbe Louise Calix. Thisbe decided the saint stole her spot and was totally consumed by it, deep down. Also, she was tripping on some crazy delusions and just made everyone miserable in every way she could. But the saint always figured out some clever way to dodge the danger. The villain was running out of ideas, just desperate to make her disappear. Then it hit her. She could become the real saint if that fake vanished for good. But in the end, her devious scheme was foiled, and Thisbe was sentenced to death. And the kind and graceful saint lived happily ever after with her beloved, where darkness had no place. This story is called The Flower Taming Monsters, or Monster Flower for short, and the heroine of our story didn't even realize how she got reincarnated into this novel. 24 years ago, she was a university student, and one day, she got hit by a car on her way home. She woke up not in a hospital, but in a cradle, hearing the voices of a maid and a man. He stood over her crib, saying how much she looked like her mother, thinking it would have been better if she looked like her father. The aforementioned father turned out to be dead, but his parent was also present. At first, the heroine thought she was dreaming, but everything was too real to be a dream, and she realized that she had been reborn into a wealthy family, but both of her parents had died. They thought of her as a child oracle, born to save the whole damn empire. She was also supposed to make the Calixte name legendary, like it would shine forever. At first, she was totally lost, but then it hit her. She'd been reborn as someone special, blessed by the heavens. Because of that, she had to grow up as a saint, the empire's savior. She had fencing lessons and studied foreign languages, all that high society stuff. They also drilled her on etiquette, which she thought was a total drag and super exhausting. And she couldn't figure out why they expected so much from her, 'cause she was just a kid. They were trying to mold her into her grandpa's image, but it felt way too harsh. Only after living in this world for a few years did she finally start to get it. Everything felt so familiar, like she'd seen it all before somewhere. Then it hit her like a ton of bricks. She was trapped in Monster Flower and couldn't believe she was the villain. It had been 6 years since she'd been reborn as Thisbe. Now she was freaking out, because if things played out like in the book, she was going to get the axe. She didn't get why this was happening to her, and it was driving her nuts. After that realization, she didn't see the point in busting her butt just to get some kind of favor. The real saint is Estelle Iller, born into a side branch of the Calixte family. She's also the main character in Monster Flower. Thisbe was all grown up now, a young woman, and she was about to attend a reception. Handmaids were helping her get ready, and a carriage was waiting for her downstairs. By this time, memories from her past life had also come flooding back, and it was wearing her down. And what really ticked her off was that the Oracle's kid was stuck in such a dead-end situation, all because she's the god's favorite, which just felt totally unfair. If she didn't have those past life memories, things would be a whole lot easier. In the novel, Thisbe didn't start out bullying Estelle. People called her a liar and a real piece of work. Eventually, it got to her, and she stooped to some pretty low blows. But she knew she wasn't the real Thisbe, so all hope wasn't lost yet. On the way to the carriage, someone offered her a newspaper, but she turned it down. She was thinking that if it weren't for her social standing, things would be way simpler. And from that moment on, she decided to live her own life, not just follow the damn plot, especially after having to deal with so much crap already, no matter what the nobles did to her or what rumors they spread. The heroine decided to squeeze every last drop of advantage out of it all. They say you gotta forge your own destiny, right? So, Thisbe decided to stay out of trouble. She was sure that once the hard work was done, she'd finally be free. That's what she thought, until she noticed the people who should have been dying by her hand were suddenly dropping like flies. It wasn't clear why it was happening, like death was hunting them down to keep the story on track. And just like that, Thisbe's dreams of an easy life went up in smoke. Before, she'd been playing the game right, and things were going her way. But then it turned out Estelle was a true saint. A month ago, the nobles gathered for the imperial hunt, when suddenly a monster showed up. Just like the book said, Estelle tamed the savage beast, and nobody got hurt. That was the day the novel's main character arrived, having charmed the monster. People gawked at the scene, totally stunned, not understanding how it was possible. This girl just handled a monster that only a squad of elite knights could take down. That day, people started suspecting Princess Calixte was just faking the whole saint thing. People doubted that Thisbe had any power, and her fate was now up in the air. But she knew deep down that something like this was bound to happen eventually. And everything she went through as a saint now seemed like a total waste of time. That's probably why the original Thisbe fought so hard to be recognized as a saint and tried to justify herself, even though everyone saw what Estelle could do. The truth is, nobody's gonna listen to a phony saint. Our girl wasn't about to eat dirt, so she just walked right up to her relative and thanked her for making sure everyone survived, thanks to what she did. She even admitted herself that Estelle was the real deal, the chosen one from the prophecy. Everyone around was in shock, because they thought Thisbe would be furious, but she gave up her title without a fight. She figured it was better to make a graceful exit than keep living a lie. And after a quick chat with Estelle, she took her leave, deciding to disappear. The girl really believed this was the best way things could end, but she was wrong. For a while, everything was chill, and she went back to living a more normal life. But then people started dying. People who had been, let's just say, not her biggest fans. Thisbe knew she could easily be framed for the murders, and her cushy life would be over. That day, she got so sucked into reading the newspaper, she totally forgot about her guest. It was her fiancé, Sor Armand Salvatore, who was also a villain in the novel. He noticed his bride was worried and asked her to share, but Thisbe didn't want to let him in on her anxieties. She pretended she was just spacing out, too focused on the paper. In the novel, this guy was sweet and kind to her, showing her a lot of love, and he supports Thisbe until the very end, before tragically kicking the bucket. Originally, she cooked up a scheme to take care of Estelle, so she could keep what was hers. She asked Sor to make sure Estelle was feeling under the weather until after the festival, and she'd give him poison disguised as medicine to slip into her cup, and he couldn't refuse because of his feelings for her. Still, slipping something into someone's drink went against his code, so he decided to test the medicine himself first. After that, he was just sick for 3 days and realized Thisbe didn't have any bad intentions. Sun trusted his fiancé and added the medicine to the saint's cup. But with black tea, that mixture turned into poison. Ultimately, Sora was arrested for a crime against the saint, and Estelle fell into a coma. Even so, he kept defending Thisbe until the very end, like your average lovesick idiot. In the novel, he's this sweet, innocent guy with a pretty face, and the girl even felt guilty that she used to think he was dumb, not knowing the real reason why. Right now, he was worried that Thisbe was upset about some article, and it was hard for him to see her suffering, so he asked her to share what was bothering her. At that moment, the girl even felt sorry for him, because you could practically call him an angel. She couldn't even believe a guy like him existed, let alone that he was her fiancé. And she showed him the article about Marquis de Manette dying in a car crash. The accident happened because a wheel came off the carriage, which Thisbe thought was weird. I mean, the carriage was brand new, made just last week. A lot of people think it wasn't an accident at all. Sor realized she could be accused of murder, since all the victims had contact with her. But he was on her side, since the victims were the ones who started beef with her in the first place. They were spreading rumors that the Oracle's daughter was a total fraud. And as a result, they started dropping like flies. But it was still a mystery who was behind it all. Thisbe was bummed, because with these accusations hanging over her head, she wouldn't be able to live happily. But after talking to Sor and getting his support, she chilled out a little. After the real saint showed up, people ditched Thisbe faster than you can blink. Sor saw the article in the paper and knew his girl was being framed. She told him not to sweat it, that the truth would come out eventually. But he was losing sleep over the crap she was having to put up with. You could see it in his eyes, the dude was seriously stressing. That's when Thisbe told him all the gossip didn't mean jack to her. She kept telling her man everything was cool, but he had a bad feeling about it. So, to put her fiancé's mind at ease, Thisbe let him in on a little secret. That things would be alright, because she was gonna nail the real perp herself. Reality was playing out just like the original story, and it seemed like getting out of here would be a piece of cake. It was a last resort, but still better than the alternative. A few nights ago, Thisbe couldn't sleep for the longest time. She thought the book was way too harsh on the villainess, which you know is her. After all, unlike the original, She obediently handed over the Saintess title, and she hoped that after that, people wouldn't trash talk her right to her face. But the result was even worse. They hated her even more, when Thisbe turned out to be kind and funny. Still, everyone kept blaming her, hating her, and treating her like she was totally nuts. And if this keeps up, they'll kick her out of the family, and her whole long-term plan will be screwed. Because the one they thought was the real Saintess turned out to be a fake. And there are rumors she's a killer. The Calixt family values honor, and they'll probably try to marry her off to Soar. That way, a lot of lives get saved. But Thisbe's stuck in her own house for good. The engagement was originally cooked up by the elders of Duke Salvatore's family, but she didn't want Soar cleaning up the mess after these decisions went down. She wanted to find a place where she could really put her skills to work. She wanted a quiet life, and that's when she remembered the Kingdom of Seas. It's a tiny magic country nestled between three major powers. More like a giant city, really. They only let in a select few who know how to use magic. And against all odds, Thisbe actually could use her powers. Holy power and magic power come from the same source, because they both use mana, and depending on the nature of the mana, it can move according to the user's will. Thing is, not many people can even use mana, so this kind of power wasn't exactly common knowledge. In the novel, Thisbe used this magical power, which she triggered by accident, and everyone just assumed it was divine. That made it even harder for her to believe she wasn't some kind of saint. In the original story, Thisbe secretly continued training on her own. Eventually, she learned to control her magical power, passing it off as some kind of holy gift. She abused this power, making Estelle's life a living hell, and died without ever understanding her true potential. But our girl knows what her real talent is and how valuable it is. Up until now, she's been honing her magical power based on what she read in the book. With skills like these, Cez will welcome her with open arms. Once you're stuck in this country, you're cut off from the outside world, and all your stats are basically useless. For our girl, this turn of events was the perfect solution. But caught up in plotting her plan, she forgot one little thing. All visitors to Sice are supposed to be cleared of any criminal charges. So, to get Thisbe off the hook, she decided to find the real culprit herself. Now that she admitted she wanted to nail that jerk Soru, he thought it was way too risky. And he got even more worked up about it, which she thought was kinda cute. He knows she's good with a sword, but that doesn't mean she won't get hurt. Then Thisbe declared she'd have backup, since she's still part of the Duke's family. Last time, she definitely had her doubts about whether everyone would be on her side. But she didn't think Soar would remember that, since he usually just listens quietly. Turns out this guy's got a surprisingly good memory, and he's swearing up and down that all those deaths were just accidents. But one death a day in Thisbe? That's still raising red flags. So she can't just brush off this article, thinking it's all BS. She was really hoping that newspaper peddling this garbage would go belly up. Thisbe even crumpled the paper up for emphasis and chucked it on the floor. Turns out the publisher's drowning in debt, so they're screwed even without her and Soar getting involved. It's pretty likely they'll be declaring bankruptcy in a few days. The original story implied Thisbe's actions helped bring them down. But now she couldn't punish the publisher, and that news actually cheered her up. She was thrilled at the prospect of the newspaper going down in flames. Soar was just happy to do whatever Thisbe wanted. It even lit a sinister spark in his eyes. Now all she has to do is catch the culprit, and she won't back down from her word. She knows Soar's worried about her, but she needs to clear her name. Besides, it's possible that a powerful figure is about to bite the dust. It's the son of Margrave Lunette, who tried to get with Thisbe, but struck out. And because of his issues with Soar, he's been trying to provoke Thisbe any way he can. But the real problem isn't the young Margrave Lunette, it's his father. Count Lunette is the top dog among the Margraves fighting monsters on the border. His influence is seriously huge, and that's what made the Calixt family ditch Thisbe. And if the young Earl bites the dust, his old man will be gunning for Thisbe before she even nabs the real killer. That'd box her into a corner, and she can't let that happen. Soar suddenly chimed in, wondering why all those past deaths didn't exactly make Thisbe a happy camper. But she insisted it was actually a relief. The problem is, that same arrow came right back at her, and now everyone thinks she's the guilty one. Because deaths stacking up day after day sure make it look that way. Soar was a little thrown, but figured the daily grind was the real issue. I mean, random deaths don't happen every single day, just now and then. Then Soar asked out of the blue if Frisbee would feel better if those deaths weren't pinned on her. For a second, she froze, totally confused about why he'd even ask that. But then she chilled out and smiled, 'cause this was gonna be way better for her anyway. Plus, she was super happy seeing Sora so stoked, especially since he promised to nail whoever did this. The way he said it was so sweet, Frisbee totally relaxed. She didn't even realize then that all those good vibes from that day would kick off a whole mess of trouble. Frisbee didn't suspect Sora at all. She just figured he was helping, 'cause he was a genuinely good and honest dude. But the biggest reason for that was Frisbee herself, 'cause he thought she didn't give a rat's behind about anyone. She was always worn out by people staring, so she just shut herself off from everyone. The guy didn't even realize she was totally aware of it. And when she thanked him for the awesome time, he was all, "No, thank you." Frisbee also thanked him for all the sweet nothings he always whispered to her. He kissed her hand, but noticed the sad, lonely look on her face. He really wanted to know what was making her so sad, what she wasn't saying. Sometimes she acts like she's about to disappear forever, but Sora decided not to push her. He just recently had a terrible thought, that it's all those lowlifes who are harassing his noble bride-to-be. It pissed him off that these scumbags were causing trouble, even in their final moments, and it disgusted him to watch the guilty parties grovel at his feet, begging for mercy. Of course, someone else did the dirty work for him, someone he could trust. Sora's personal bodyguard, Lass, and he reported everything to his master in detail. Now he met Sora, politely asking how the meeting went. Dude was totally showing off, thinking nothing could possibly go wrong, especially since he'd been showering his fiancée with attention lately. But now, something else popped up that he had to take care of ASAP. Lass knew he was going to be burning the midnight oil tonight. Sora shoved a newspaper article in his face, saying it was time to pay those deadbeats a visit. A few days later, a shady deal between the publisher and the Secretary of State blew wide open. Turns out they were drowning in debt, and now the publishing house is going belly up. Frisbee had been waiting for this to happen, but she never thought it would all go down so fast. People were shocked the publisher tanked, all because the director was gambling away his fortune. Everyone thought he was on the level, but now they see it was all a big con. Frisbee confessed to her personal maid that she had her suspicions about it, but she wasn't about to discuss it with the Duke, like her assistant suggested. At home, she lied and said she was going with him to a meeting, but if she hadn't done that, they wouldn't have let her do things her way. Grandpa asked her to hold off on going out for the time being, because public opinion about Frisbee hasn't exactly been stellar lately. Plus, they forbade her from going out alone, so it wouldn't hurt her image. There was only one exception. She was allowed to meet with her fiancé. Frisbee arranged a dinner with Sora for next week and took advantage of it. Grandpa agreed, but demanded she take a maid with her. She didn't argue, because she had to get out of the house today. Today's the day that young Count Lynette bites the dust at that black market auction, and she's dead set on stopping it. She's been digging for info for 2 weeks, trying to prevent this hit. She saw a picture of a ring in the paper called Cat's Wish, and it seemed fishy. She bounced her theory off her fiancé, asking him to decode what it could mean. After thinking it over for a minute, he said the real name is Cursed Ring. The code meant it was an ad for the black market. The same black market where originally young Count Lynette was supposed to get offed. So Frisbee decided to head over there, but she kept her plan a secret from her fiancé. A little while later, throwing on a cloak with a deep hood, she arrived at the auction. She took care of the maid who'd been watching her on Grandpa's orders. She started observing, but for a long time, things seemed way too quiet. Maholan, the leader of the Zodiac Info Guild, was standing nearby, but he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. This guy was always Frisbee's shadow in the original novel. The guild itself, disguised as a cafe, was among Estelle's lackeys. Frisbee's position was shaky right now, so she needed some muscle too. That's why she reached out to the guild before they got too tight with Estelle. Maholan doesn't know what she's plotting, but he's one of her few allies. Thanks to him, Frisbee got an invite to the black market, where she planned to pick something up. She was thinking about that grimoire she really liked, the one that cost 3 million gold. It's impossible to find one like that in this country, but Frisbee didn't want to get sidetracked, since she wasn't here to shop. She was here to figure out how someone could get murdered in a house packed with people, especially the Margrave's son. Usually, you don't see murders happening in a crowd like that. But just in case, Frisbee had Mahalorn tailing Lunette, He didn't ask for details, just promised to stick close to him. Soon, they put up the last item for auction, Marietta's cursed ring. The girl took a closer look at its glow, which was even more alluring because it had been blessed. Just then, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Thisbe was totally surprised when she saw Sor approaching her. He was just as thrown to see his fiancée in a dump like this. This was the last guy Thisbe wanted to run into, and now he's pulling up a chair. She also wondered if that ring would bring bad luck, if she left it where it was. Plus, she didn't want Sora to think she's some kind of regular at a place like this. So she confessed she snuck in, just out of curiosity, to check some stuff out, adding in a whisper that this was her first time hitting up the black market. Sora didn't grill her, but he was glad he could be there with her, saying it was his first time too, so he was a little on edge. The dude looked like an angel to Thisbe again, but it felt like something dark was lurking behind him. She just hoped he wouldn't start firing off a bunch of questions. Plus, she was worried something might happen to him. I mean, this is the place where a murder's about to go down, and Sor could get hurt. His face suddenly flushed, and he brought up that announcement that Thisbe saw. It seemed to him that his fiancée was really interested in that ring. A lot of bad stuff's been happening lately, and he decided to give her the ring to cheer her up. She couldn't even believe that Sor would go out of his way to get her such a special gift, but she still didn't get how he knew she liked it, and how he found her, since he couldn't see her face. Turns out he heard her voice. She started talking louder when the ring was put up for auction. That's when he heard her. Sor also admitted he'd find Thisbe no matter where she was, even when her face is hidden and she doesn't say a word. His special feelings for this girl were the reason for his talent. His whispering voice totally captivated Thisbe at that moment, and she spaced out for a second. But she got worried when she realized she might have missed something important. And now she doesn't know how the young Earl is doing, or if he's even still alive. A minute later, the host announced the auction was over, and the ring had been sold. The auction house got super noisy, and in a situation like this, Lunette could become a target. Thisbe didn't want Sor, who had just bought the ring, to get caught up in this. He was clearly into her, even though their engagement was just a business arrangement. Because of that, Thisbe decided she wouldn't let him get hurt, not ever. She doesn't want Sor getting into danger, but she can't just leave things the way they are either. Not far off, she spotted Mahalan, who's supposed to be watching and stopping this hit. He followed her with his eyes, unseen, and was actually happy about the order, because handling stuff like this was right up his alley. Thisbe really trusted Mahalan and hoped there wouldn't be any snags. For now, she decided to get Sor out of here ASAP so he wouldn't get hurt. She got home super tired, even though she hadn't really done anything special, except grab dinner with her fiancé after the auction and pig out on desserts. Right now, all she wanted was to take a shower and crash. Walking down the hall, she overheard some disgruntled voices talking smack about her. Her very existence is now undermining the honor of the Callisto family. These were the elders, the same ones who used to treat Thisbe like a saint. She studied under them from a young age, but constantly suffered their insults. Unlike the original story, these guys are acting totally different. In the novel, they were the ones who helped Estelle get into the Callisto family and helped her out when she was in trouble. Now they're also fighting to get Estelle the Callisto name. Thisbe was furious, because she's always been the one carrying that weight. She nervously ripped a pearl bracelet off her wrist. The noise echoed through the study, and her grandfather knew she'd heard everything. He went to check, but all that was left were white pearls scattered on the floor. The old man chewed out the elders for raising their voices at the wrong time, and he kicked them out, telling them not to question Thisbe's responsibilities. Otherwise, he threatened to, well, let's just say things would get unpleasant for their tongues. The elders agreed to leave, but hoped to get some answers next time. Just then, Thisbe walked in and was disgusted by what she'd overheard. Her grandfather was surprised by her sudden appearance, and she politely explained that she'd only just gotten home. The old man got worried, since it was pretty late, and he wondered where she'd been. Thisbe explained she'd been hanging out with Sor, who walked her home, so she wasn't in her own ride. And she apologized for interrupting, making up a story about her bracelet breaking. But her grandpa didn't blame her at all, saying he was planning on kicking them out anyway. Right now, he was more worried about how much she'd overheard. Thisbe didn't want to upset him, so she told him not to worry about her. She even admitted that she thought she'd gone too far. Her grandfather was the kind of guy who valued the family's reputation way more than their bloodline. Thisbe went to bed, confused why he wouldn't accept Estelle. What surprised her more was the look on his face when they talked that evening. She didn't have any real reason to be worried about it, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. It was the same in the past. She just wanted to hear some kind words from someone during tough times. People praised her talent, and the maid even gave her a birthday present once. It was just a little pincushion, something she'd made herself. That's why Thisbe was nice to everyone. But nobody ever said anything genuinely kind to her. Count Lunette was just faking it because of his insecurities. And the teacher said she loved her. But really, she just wanted to cash in on her reputation. Then, in the pincushion she'd been given, she found a poisoned needle. If none of that had happened, Thisbe thought things could have turned out differently. All those thoughts kept her awake for a long time. And then she started thinking about Mahalan. She was dying to know how it went for him. Plus, she needed to read that grimoire. Soon her eyes started to droop, thinking she still needed to write a letter to Sor. Thisbe just stayed put, hoping he'd understand if she wrote to him a little later. After a while, Sor just stared at the paper, completely lost in it. He hadn't heard from Thisbe, and he was getting worried, because she always wrote after they met. Right now, he was holding an info sheet, the kind used for sharing information. Whatever's written on this one shows up on the other copy too. This magical thing cost a fortune, so it's a super rare luxury item. The messages written on it vanish after a day. And Sor was using one of these as a love letter. He gave one of these to Lady Thisbe, which totally surprised her. I mean, it's way too expensive. There's no way she could just accept it. So she asked Sor to take it back, hoping the sheet was still in one piece. And right now, he was stressing that Phoebe hadn't texted him back, even though he figured she probably just crashed. That thought chilled him out a little, and his right-hand man suggested they get to the report. But first, he handed his boss the gift he'd asked him to hold on to. Then, Lars reported in that just like he was ordered, he tried to take out the target when he left his place. But out of nowhere, a wrench got thrown in the works. Someone else showed up at the same time. Lars thinks he's dealing with a shadow user, and there's only one guy like that on the whole continent. It's Mahalan, leader of the Zodiac Guild, and you can't get to him because he's always hiding in the shadows. The assistant apologized to Sor for not completing the assignment, but Sor didn't blame him. He knew damn well you can't just roll over Mahalan. Sor didn't know how he was mixed up in this, but he decided to figure it out later. The next morning, Thisbe woke up with a jolt, realizing she'd just passed out cold. She immediately contacted Mahalan through the magic crystal to see how things were going. He reported that the young Earl was still alive and confirmed her suspicions. He discovered that someone was definitely targeting young Lunette. He'd been tailing the guy, hidden in the shadows, but they spotted him, and he had to bail. And Thisbe realized this was someone skilled, if they could see through Mahalan's darkness. Darkness is his ability to control shadows and all things dark, and he's almost impossible to beat. Still, there was the worry that this person would try to take out the Earl again, and Thisbe was concerned that they still hadn't caught the culprit. That might mean he's got more pull than she does, and she still had no idea what his game was, why he was taking out these people. It hit her. Maybe she was starting to get some copycats. Ever since they announced Estelle was the real Oracle Saint. Or maybe he was trying to frame Thisbe, then ice her too. While she was talking to Mahalan, they heard someone scream from the hallway. The girl quickly decided to go find out who Grandpa was yelling at. He kept shouting that Princess Thisbe always was, is, and always will be the saint. She honestly didn't get why he was pushing that so hard. Downstairs, she saw one of the elders, Count Gillette, a skinny guy with glasses. He was begging the Duke to listen to how Thisbe was now affecting the family. But the old man dug his heels in, saying he'd only support his granddaughter, not Estelle. He wouldn't even hear about registering St. Iller as his adopted daughter. He just didn't believe that taking Estelle into the Callisto family would be way more beneficial. After all, Thisbe had lived her whole life as a saint, thinking she was the Oracle's child. And he was worried about how she was feeling, considering she was suspected of, well, you know, Thisbe herself couldn't figure out why her grandpa was acting like this now, when he'd never said a kind word to her. And he never really paid her any attention anyway. But even now, hearing his opinion, Thisbe was still determined to leave. She didn't want to eavesdrop anymore, and she kept moving. From the window, she spotted a fancy carriage and remembered that today was the day of Gillette's visit. And so, It was the day Estelle first visited the Callisto estate. According to the original story, she was supposed to talk to the Duke, but now she's just waiting in the carriage. Thisbe wondered if she should even get involved, since her whole plan was to ditch this family. She walked up to the carriage and asked Estelle to step out for a quick chat. Estelle remembered hearing stories about how saintly and intelligent she was since she was a kid. She was always told to study hard and grow up to be just as amazing. The Holy Maiden had been Estelle's idol since childhood, and she first saw her at the hunting competition. But then, out of nowhere, this monster showed up, threatening to wipe everyone out. The beast roared, saying it couldn't get any sleep because of all the racket. And the knights? They were nowhere to be found when they should have been fighting the thing. Estelle was freaking out that if things kept going like this, the saint was going to be in serious danger. She decided to ditch the fear and try to handle the monster herself. The girl walked right up, hugged it, and asked it to chill out, which totally blew everyone's minds. I mean, she did something the saint couldn't, and now everyone's thinking hard about it. Estelle's related to Thisbe, so obviously she's got Calixtus blood running through her veins. It was weird seeing that kind of power in this girl, and not in the saint. And people are starting to think that the oracle's prophesied kid is actually Iller. Estelle just wanted to calm the monster down, scared the saint was going to get hurt, and later, she was kicking herself for unintentionally causing trouble for the saint. All this stuff flashed through Estelle's head the second Thisbe walked up to her. Against all odds, though, the Duchess actually praised her for what she did, because thanks to Estelle, everyone managed to survive that day. Ilir was even happy about it, since she hadn't seen the saint since then. And now, Thisbe even greeted her warmly, inviting her into the house like an honored guest. It felt like a dream to Estelle, but she apologized for being late. She was burning with curiosity, wondering what happened that the saint herself had to come out. Thisbe took her hand, invited her in, and promised to tell her everything along the way. Her intentions were good. She wanted to welcome Estelle into the family. The Duke was still going on about how he wouldn't jeopardize his granddaughter's standing, who's now suspected of, mischief and needs protection. And somehow, all of this just kept reminding him of his dead son. All he needed to do before was one thing: declare Thisbe a saint and raise her into someone everyone would be proud of. But he was nervous to talk to her, because usually all kids just burst into tears around him. So he gave the butler a list of tutors for his granddaughter, all handpicked by him. With them, she's got to learn how to live a life without envying everyone else. The Duke himself only knows how to bark orders in a military tone, which is way too harsh for a kid. Thisbe was practicing fencing and somehow ended up bruising her knee. Her maid was about to call a doctor and tell the Duke right away, but she stopped her, because her grandpa's a super busy guy, and she didn't want to bother him over a scratch. The Duke didn't think he was a great grandpa, but the thought of hurting her never even crossed his mind. So now he's hoping Count Gillette will understand, seeing as he's a father himself. He had no choice but to agree with the head of the family. And then a smug Thisbe walked in, leading Lady Estelle by the hand. But that got the Duke all worked up. His granddaughter bringing that girl here was a real complication, because he'd only just managed to convince this persistent guy he was in the right. Gillet, on the other hand, was happy to see Estelle show up at the house. Thisbe explained she'd seen the carriage while she was out for a stroll and got curious. Then she apologized for being rude, but the Count wasn't even thinking about getting mad over that, especially since Estelle had been wanting to meet the princess for ages. Lady Iller was super flustered, and Thisbe happily announced they'd already talked about the reason for the visit. The Count whispered that the Duke hasn't given the go-ahead to invite Estelle as a guest yet. The family head thought the situation was weird, but he wasn't rushing to respond. Still, Thisbe couldn't understand how anyone could leave someone baking in a carriage in this heat, and Grandpa hinted what bringing that lady to Calixt really meant. In other words, it's the same as giving Lady Iller their family name. Then the Duke declared, more menacingly, that he had no intention of doing that. Thisbe didn't want to push it. She just hoped Grandpa would do the right thing. But she was bummed he treated Lady Estelle so harshly. The Duke was floored by his granddaughter's bluntness, and she insisted that Estelle needed Calixt's protection, so no one else would get hurt because of it. Thisbe herself declared this girl an oracle's kid and demanded she be treated accordingly. With every word Thisbe spoke, the Duke just got more and more shocked and pissed off. Her statement is going to have some serious blowback, and it ain't going to be pretty for her. And the old man just couldn't figure out why his granddaughter was sticking to her guns. Thisbe just asked him to make the smart call and cut her loose from the family. All she wants is to get out of here. She doesn't care who becomes the adopted daughter or the saint. And she gets that the Duke's just trying to avoid the fallout and that he's disowning his own flesh and blood. But then, out of nowhere, he agrees to grant Lady Estelle the Calixed name, just like his granddaughter wanted. Of course, that news made Count Gillette one happy camper. But the Duke added that the name comes with a D prefix. Everyone froze, waiting. Especially the Count, who had no clue what was going on. The Decalixed name is given to someone who isn't already a member of the family. Thisbe still didn't get why Grandpa was making it so hard to register Estelle. But right now, the most important thing is that Estelle herself doesn't turn it down. The girl was busy thinking about what would happen if she became Lady Calixed. Before they went in, Thisbe explained that it would be the position she deserved. She told her not to worry about her, promising she'd find her own place. During that whole conversation, all Estelle cared about was the role of the saint. She didn't even stop to think about how the princess was feeling. And now, standing in front of the Duke, she vowed to stand by Thisbe's side. She bounced after the announcement, leaving the others to hash things out. And she was going to wrap up the rest of her plan on her own. Back in her room, she saw Soar had sent her a message. It was a reply to the letter she'd written not long ago. Thisbe could feel the mana and emotions coming through with the message. But even so, it wasn't the same as talking to him face to face. Soar wrote that he'd been worried because he hadn't gotten her letter right away, but then he figured she'd gone to bed. He also said he was super happy to even get a quick message from her. It actually made her happy that the guy was waiting to hear from her. And once again, she was sure his intentions and feelings towards her were good. Soar was worried sick, and her answer was a huge relief, knowing she was okay. He even offered to let her be the owner of that ring she was eyeing at the auction. Besides, that yellow stone in it really brings out the color of her eyes. In this letter, Soar was his usual long-winded self, paying attention to every little detail. He even reminded her that there's a banquet at the Imperial Palace the day after tomorrow, and he asked her to tell him what dress she'll be wearing, so his outfit can match. Thisbe realized she'd totally spaced on the banquet and decided to write back right away. The first lines were agreeing that the stone in the ring was a fashionable match for her eye color. She also mentioned her outfit was formal, and Soar replied instantly, like he was glued to the paper. He confessed that his outfit would have a boutonniere shaped like a sword. After that, they talked a little more about the finer points of the outfits. And then, Thisbe asked why he'd brought up pigeons in his first message. She also confessed that the Holy Lady Estelle had visited the residence. But the bigger news was that she'd gotten the Calixed name. Suddenly, Soar wondered if this lady was at all hostile towards Thisbe, though there aren't any rumors that Estelle hates her. Actually, those two girls should have a pretty complicated relationship. They're both the same age and were competing for the title of saint. But things are a little different now, and Thisbe and Estelle get along just fine. Estelle's got to be a good person, since in the novel, her heart was the key to saving the world. Thisbe totally got where Soar was coming from, and honestly, she didn't think it was weird at all. She just thanked him for worrying and told him Estelle was a good egg. But the dude reminded her that every backstab starts with a fake-ass smile, and he begged his bride to watch her back and be ready for anything. He chilled out a little when Thisbe said Estelle was too soft and didn't really have a choice anyway. But even so, he was already plotting to take care of anything that got in her way. After he finished texting his bride, Soar turned to his assistant, Lass, and in a dead calm voice, he announced that they had a new target. Lass was sweating it, because if two people croak in the palace, they're gonna notice, you know? But the new target was the leader of the Zodiac Guild, Constellation. He was already a pain in the ass, and when he finds out Estelle's Aquarius's cousin, he's gonna lose his damn mind. Even though Thisbe said Lady Iller wasn't in any danger, Soar didn't want her exposed to any risk. That's why he decided to give Zodiac and Estelle a heads up. Besides, we shouldn't just kill the guild leader. We should frame him for all the murders. He'll be brought to justice, and that'll take care of another problem. The Zodiac Guild borrowed a lot of names from constellations. Their big shot was given the name Cassiopeia. She's the anchor star. Each of the 12 zodiac signs was given a constellation. But the issue is, one of the leaders is Estelle's cousin, and Soar still had doubts that she was trying to take everything from Thisbe. On top of everything, she's marrying into the Callisto family. That's why he figured Estelle just being alive was a threat to his girl. After giving Lars his orders, he asked the butler to get a boutonniere ready. He wanted to take care of all his objectives ASAP, so nobody could mess with Fizby, who looked like she could bolt any second, like she didn't belong there. But Soar was hoping that way she'd stick around him. Later, Fizby met up with Mahalan before heading to Soar. She was an hour late for the meet, and the guild boss even gave her some grief for it. But he admitted he wasn't really focused on the target himself today, so she decided to handle it and asked Mahalan to keep an eye on Estelle. He got curious about how Fizby knew Lady Iller was Aquarius's cousin. She suddenly stopped, and her face turned serious and flustered. She wanted to dodge the question by using the guild's motto. The truth was, she didn't know how to explain it and started to stammer. Fizby never could lie, and Mahalan noticed it again. He just figured someone leaked the info, though he's sure it wasn't anyone from the guild. Anyway, they said goodbye, agreeing to meet up later. The guild leader disappeared back into the shadows, and Fizby continued on her way. She realized she'd blurted something out without thinking, and it wasn't the first time. She had this feeling like the memories of the book and her past life were getting more and more mixed up, which means her past life could soon be wiped clean from her memory. The only thing she's sure of right now are the memories of this world, and all the information she has is like trying to fade away. Knowing she had to be careful, Thisbe headed out to meet Soar. She immediately apologized for being late, knowing he'd been waiting a while. And he, with that angelic face of his, just said there was nothing to worry about. He'd be willing to wait a whole damn month for his bride, if he had to. Thisbe noticed there wasn't a carriage, the one Soar was supposed to arrive in. He told her again not to worry, he just wanted her to be with him. She promised she wouldn't leave, and she wasn't lying. Even if their engagement falls apart later, she didn't want to lose the relationship they have right now. Thisbe thought she could easily cut all ties, but she felt like it would be tough with Soar. The young duke noticed his bride-to-be was looking at him strangely, so the girl covered it up with a compliment, saying he looked even more handsome than usual today. She just wanted this guy to always have it good. That's why she should get out of here ASAP, so she doesn't bring trouble his way. Soon it was time for Mahalan to contact her, and Lunetta was nowhere to be seen either. The girl felt uneasy and thought about going to look for him herself. But then they announced the arrival of His Majesty the Emperor, Prince Kilian Leandros. Due to the death of his older brother, he had to become the crown prince. And get this, Kilian's the main dude in the original Monster Flower novel. The prince showed up with Lady Estelle, looking all charming and stuff. But Thisbe, more than anyone, knows what this guy's really like. Back when she was a kid, she accidentally overheard him talking. He and his buddy were saying he only hangs around the Saint because it's a real gold mine. Because the Saint's got everything His Highness needs, if you catch my drift. Thisbe knew they'd bump into each other, but seeing his face still felt unreal. He's someone she's been running into at events since they were kids. Kilian's her childhood friend, and she used to think he'd stick with her, even after he found out she wasn't the real deal Saint-wise. That's how it was, until one day she overheard his real feelings. It was the day she accidentally eavesdropped on a conversation he was having. The prince was saying how he could benefit from the Saint. So, trusting him completely, Thisbe ended up getting played. At the banquet today, everyone was buzzing about Estelle's actions, praising her. The hunting incident spread like wildfire through high society. But for some reason, the Calixt family kept her hidden away, out of the public eye for a long time. And just as the curiosity about the real Saint was reaching fever pitch, she showed up on Prince Kilian's arm. It was the debut of a truly perfect saint. But at the same time, it was a real low blow to Thisbe Louise Calixt. Her fiancé noticed she was deep in thought and realized something was bothering her. And for a while now, she's been pretty focused on the prince and Estelle. She was totally staring at them, and you could see it on her face. She got all weird. Anyway, she said everything was fine and asked Soar how he was feeling. She thought maybe he wanted to hang out with His Highness, but he told her he was happy just being with Phoebe. Just then, Estelle walked over and gave them a cheerful greeting, and she complimented Phoebe on how she looked. Phoebe returned the favor, complimenting the dress Estelle was wearing tonight. The prince said hello too, mentioning that Estelle was his date for the evening. He kissed Iller's hand with a flourish, and Thisbe was actually relieved it wasn't her. The girl plastered on a smile and asked Soar to bring her some cider, explaining that her throat was a little dry and she was thirsty. But the prince found it strange that Duke Salvator didn't know about Thisbe's apple allergy. The girl didn't argue, but reminded him that the emperor also had that issue. That's why you can't find any apples in the imperial palace. Thisbe knew this, and yet she still made that request to the young duke. The atmosphere was shifting, and with each second, the prince found it more and more intriguing. And then Estelle wondered aloud if the prince and Thisbe were close friends. They both immediately denied it, even though everyone knows they've known each other since childhood. Thisbe never really stopped to think about what being friends even meant. Especially after learning the truth about Killian, she tried to keep her distance. His Highness didn't seem to mind that much, and now their conversation was getting pretty casual. Estelle was a little surprised by how they were acting, but she totally dug it, because it made her think these two were actually close. But the prince denied it, saying Lady Thisbe didn't care for him at all. And then, out of nowhere, Estelle suggested they dance together to make up. Neither Killian nor Thisbe were thrilled with the idea, but Lady Iller was laying on the pressure. So, just to get her off his back, His Highness agreed to dance for a little bit. A minute later, they were in position with the other couples, ready to get this dance over with. But the girl was trying to keep her distance, and when he asked her to chill out and get closer, she stomped on his foot with her heel. She did it on purpose, and Killian knew her personality hadn't changed. The girl just wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible, because they're being watched, and if she ditches the prince, there'll be some nasty rumors. Thisbe also noticed his dance moves hadn't changed a bit. She was also curious what kind of trick he used to bring Estelle to her, but Killian acted like he had nothing to do with it, and that Lady Iller wanted to visit the princess herself. Said she really wanted to say hello to Lady Thisbe, but couldn't find a good excuse. He also admitted that he himself was glad to see Thisbe here. Otherwise, he would have just left. Besides, he was curious to see how she'd react. And on top of all that, he called her his poor, sweet saint. Since childhood, the prince had been friends with the Kell and Evergreen merchant families. He needed all those people to seize power later on. And to get them on his side, Killian decided to find a common enemy, which he planned to make Thisbe that day, when he realized she'd overheard his conversation. He used her as a marker, and it helped him go way too far. But Thisbe couldn't exactly stop him from using her however he wanted. After all, they're friends who know each other's true colors. That day in the past, after hearing everything, Thisbe went outside. She glanced back and saw Killian staring at her with this weird look on his face, and you could practically read the hurt and disappointment all over her mug. The prince had just been busting her chops about being a bad dancer, and Thisbe told him not to be such a jerk, to which he suggested she check out her fiancé, because his face was an open book. Soar did seem a little down in the dumps, like he was totally jealous or something, but he was trying to keep it together, just praying Thisbe would hurry back. She got all riled up at what the prince said, thinking her fiancé was doing just fine. It was like she was totally blinded by love and couldn't see a thing, and Killian changed the subject, admitting he'd missed her and heard a lot lately. Word on the street is a new saint's showing up soon, and Thisbe's getting blamed for a crime. The prince started spinning her faster and faster, and she was about to eat dirt. And he dropped this bomb about how someone's going to take a shot at him this time. But frankly, Thisbe would be thrilled if it was more than just a rumor. Then Killian straight up told her he knew she was innocent. That confession stopped him dead in his tracks, and Thisbe realized what he was getting at. The prince just told her to find him if she needed backup and bailed. Thisbe knew she'd have to get on her knees and beg, or she'd be screwed. But she had no clue how he knew she was actually clean. Only explanation was that Killian himself might be mixed up in this mess. In the original story, he offed people for a reason, or at least made their lives hell. Thisbe realized she was in the lion's den if the prince was really guilty. And if Lunette gets offed and Mahalona gets pinched, no one will believe she's clean. In that case, she'll lose her shot at Sanctuary and get the axe. Thisbe went over to Soar and Estelle, who complimented her dancing. The groom was also raving, saying he had no idea she was so talented. She thanked him while trying to catch her breath from the anxiety. Then he offered her a glass of something refreshing, apologizing that he couldn't find the cider she'd ordered. But now Thisbe didn't want to drink anything. She felt suddenly sick to her stomach. She didn't want to offend him either, and braced herself to choke it down. But then, like he read her mind, the prince walked up and took the glass, saying he was thirsty too. Just a minute ago, Thisbe wasn't exactly thrilled with this guy, but he showed up at the perfect time, and that's all that mattered to her. Soar wasn't complaining either, that the crown prince took that glass for himself. Before that, she caught a glimpse of his face. It was weird and tense, and then the crystal on her bracelet lit up. which meant Mahalan was calling her. She needed to get up to the terrace on the second floor, ASAP. His voice sounded worried, and Thisbe got seriously anxious. She needed to hurry to him now. She knew something terrible had happened. To the prince, her fiancé, and Estelle, she explained that she needed to see a friend who was looking for her. So they wouldn't freak out. I told them it was some guy named Sadalin. Estelle still noticed she looked like crap and wanted to help her out. But the second she reached for Thisbe, she yanked her hand away real quick. It looked a little harsh, but she didn't give a damn at that moment. The girl just promised she'd be back soon, leaving the three of them totally confused. Estelle was lost, not understanding why the princess treated her like that. People who saw it started whispering that the fake saint was really a killer. And Lady Iller blamed herself, that Thisbe was misunderstood again because of her. She wanted to help somehow, since the princess had always been nice to her. Right now, it was just a really awkward thing that happened between them. And to fix things, Estelle decided to follow her relative. The girl took off like a shot, and the prince yelled after her, asking her to wait. Now he felt awkward and totally ditched in front of everyone. Meanwhile, Thisbe was hurrying to the terrace's second floor. It was clear something was wrong. The call was rushed, which screamed danger. Mahalan always came back from a mission safe and sound before, and Thisbe prayed that this time would be no different. Suddenly, someone clamped a hand over her mouth to stop her from screaming and yanked her back. It was Mahalan. He was slumped over, wounded, and begging her to be quiet. But the girl couldn't just stand there silently, staring at the injuries all over him. All he said was the attacker was close by, and thanked her for coming. Mahalan was wiped out from his injuries, so Thisbe let him lean on her shoulder. Then, he confessed that a shadow monster had taken over his body. It's a parasite monster that drains the host's blood in exchange for power, but if you screw up, it can devour you. So Mahalan's strength is also his weakness, and right now he needs healing. He was bleeding like crazy, and the blood loss could be a real problem. But there was almost no time left to get to the temple where he could be healed. The guy wasn't just losing blood. He was also suffering from a killer pain in his chest. So Thisbe decided to try something else and locked the door. She even covered the windows, because no one could find out what was about to go down. Even she wasn't sure it would work, but she decided to give it a shot. Then she stood by Mahalan's body and started calling on the zodiac constellations. They drew power through the constellations, and it was a godlike power. Thisbe had been practicing channeling the constellation's power for a while now. She treated mana like divine power, but didn't pay attention to its properties. That's why she could control all 12 constellations at once. Last time, she lucked out and learned some easy-to-use formations. And now, the zodiacs showed up and wanted to know why she'd summoned them. Pleased that it worked, Thisbe explained her friend was in trouble and asked for their help. The zodiacs pointed out her mana wasn't enough, and she was just spinning her wheels. But the girl wasn't backing down, explaining she was out of options. There are 3 ways to tap into the power of the 12 zodiac signs. First, you can borrow a piece of the constellation's power. Then there's descent, which lets a constellation briefly inhabit your body. And the third way is summoning, where the constellations come out directly and use their power. Right now, Thisbe was trying the most complicated summoning of all. The tricky part is, the constellation can just refuse to help the caster. Capricorn was the first to get pissed, saying she hadn't read all the grimoires yet. Thisbe just told him to get lost if he wasn't going to pitch in. She was dead set on this and ready to ask another constellation for help. Because right now, her buddy's dying, and she'll do anything to save him. Now, to the constellation. She wasn't just some kid anymore, but one seriously brave person. He was digging this fire and decided he wasn't going to pass up a body like that. He's Delta Capricorni, and he agreed to answer the summoner's call. The girl was stoked she pulled it off. And then another one showed up, Sagittarius. He liked her raw energy, and he's down to help her out too. Then, Aquarius came along from a third direction. This was already more than Thisbe could have hoped for. But there wasn't time to be amazed. They had to move fast, and the constellations got ready to hear her out. And she announced that they needed to do what they were best at. And while Thisbe was busy with all this, her fiancé was about to lose it, waiting for her. You can practically see the dude sweating bullets by the look on his face. Even the prince took a jab at him, saying he looked kinda green. Soar just mumbled an apology, saying he was sorry their first meeting was like this. But Killian was wondering if Thisbe had any clue what kind of guy he really was. I mean, they see each other every week, and the prince was shocked she hadn't picked up on anything yet. He remembers Thisbe coming up and telling the prince to back off, to stay away from her and Soar. All His Highness could think was that she was a cold-hearted woman, but she only treated Killian like that, nobody else. To everyone else, she's sweet, kind Thisbe. But around the crown prince, she was a totally different person. Soar was watching her today, and he could feel the jealousy burning up inside him. The duke started to approach the prince, but his fiancée immediately pulled him away, and in the sweetest voice, she started apologizing for being late. Just seeing her face again, Soar instantly melted and told her not to worry. But Killian started to suspect something was up, because Soar didn't follow Thisbe right away. Letting her go alone like that, it's a dead giveaway he's hiding something. Just then, the duke politely asked how her meeting with her friend went, but she just apologized again for arriving later than she promised. She couldn't exactly admit she was saving her friend from a bad situation. A little earlier, after gathering the zodiacs, she shared a trick for dealing with low mana. There's energy in the air too, and she can use her mana as a filter. Now's not the time for the constellations to overthink things. They gotta move fast. Aquarius was the best healer of the bunch, so Thisbe asked him to heal Mahalan. The guy was super weak, but he could still be saved. Sagittarius, the best attacker, was tasked with protecting Lord Lunette. And Capricorn, who can use his strength, will move Mahalan to the carriage and guard him. Capricorn thought it was a bit of a letdown to be used as a guard, but Aquarius asked Thisbe to leave this guy to them. She could feel her worries, which were being transmitted through her mana. So, thanks to their help, the girl got back quickly, even though she used up a lot of mana. But then the prince noticed that Lady Estelle had vanished. Thisbe was so worked up, she didn't even realize Estelle was gone at first. And Killian explained that she'd rushed after Thisbe when she left them. Now she suspected Estelle was around, and she needed to figure out if she was right. Suddenly, Soar declared the prince should find Lady Iller himself, since she's his partner. But he objected, pointing out his conversation with Thisbe as a pretty damn good reason, who started to notice the tension rising, but kept her mouth shut. And Soar immediately apologized for being a bit of a jerk to the prince. He just didn't want to drag the bride into the search, because she looked wiped. Thisbe immediately chimed in, saying how considerate her fiancé was, and told Killian to take notes. Suddenly, the prince confessed he was bummed out today and just took his anger out for no good reason. You could totally see his mood tank, and Thisbe figured she should bounce out of there ASAP. She could always get the lowdown from Estelle later, when she hit her up. Before splitting, she just reminded Killian to go find Lady Iller, and that ditching his date was a seriously lame move. The prince tried to stop her, wanted to keep talking, but she wasn't having it, and Soar offered to escort her back to the duchy. Usually, Thisbe would pass, but today she actually welcomed the company. Then she freaked out, remembering Mahalan was still in the carriage she arrived in. All she could do was hope he was doing okay, and had already taken off. They headed to the Duke's carriage, where his assistant Las met him and reported that everything was done. Soar thanked him for the excellent work and gave him the rest of the day off. Las bowed, and as he adjusted his hat, Thisbe noticed a wound on him. There was a fresh scrape on his arm, recently bandaged, and the girl started to get suspicious. After returning home, Thisbe couldn't get what she'd seen out of her head. After all, Las never did say where he got hurt when she asked him about it. His excuse was that he got the wound during training with the Duke. Thisbe pretended to believe him, but something told her he was lying. The bandage was really wet with blood that had soaked through, because it was so fresh. But in the end, she figured she was just getting worked up over nothing and went to check on Mahalan. He's in his room, stable, and Aquarius is keeping an eye on him. Sagittarius and Capricorn made sure Lunette got home safe too. And Thisbe really thanked them for a job well done. But they were actually having a blast getting back to the human world and doing something. Thisbe promised all three of them she'd show them something special next time. And Sagittarius reported that Lunette was definitely being followed. Unfortunately, he couldn't get a good look at their faces because they bolted. But he did say one of them had a gash on his right arm. Thisbe remembered Las had the same kind of wound, and she couldn't believe it was just a coincidence. While she was trying to piece things together, Mahalan came to. His head was pounding, and he was totally disoriented. That's when Thisbe explained she'd moved him to her chambers because he'd been out cold for ages. At first, the guy seemed pretty chill, but then he suddenly jumped. It was like it finally hit him. He was in the young Duchess's private room. But the girl herself didn't see a problem with it, especially since she didn't have a choice. Mahalan took a quick look at himself and noticed his scars seemed to be gone. Plus, the demons inside him were quiet, and he got curious about how that happened. Thisbe bragged that she'd borrowed the power of the constellations, and it was her first time doing it too. Then, she started grilling him about what went down. He was supposed to be watching Lunette. Turns out, he walked into an ambush. Some unknown dude jumped him. What's even weirder is this dude pinpointed his hidden location in the shadows. It was like this stranger could see right through him. Luckily, Mahalan got away, but now he's kicking himself for screwing up. And that guy almost nabbed the target. Just a hair more, and Mahalan would have failed Thisbe. The girl told him not to sweat it so much, since his life is way more important. Besides, they didn't lose anyone today, so no reason to get all bummed out. Still, the guy's worried this means he'll have a hard time protecting targets in the future. 'Cause that dude didn't just see through the shadows, he was ready to fight back. That means he knew someone was tailing Lunette. Mahalan's also sure it's the same guy they ran into before. Thisbe agreed, but she was sure that guy wasn't planning on killing the guild leader. She realized the stranger was planning to commit the crime and pin it all on Mahalan. That's why he attacked specifically to stop her from escaping. It weighed on her now that the real culprit was way faster and nastier than she thought. Meanwhile, the guild leader was blown away that she managed to summon constellations, especially on her first try. She used the mana text Mahalan gave her, plus that grimoire from the last auction. The guy also thanked her for the healing, which he couldn't have gotten at any temple. The girl explained a little about how to use her powers for summoning, because the summoning itself is pretty tough to pull off without the right prep. The connection with the mage has to be strong, which is a real pain because of how fast mana drains. But Thisbe felt great. Her connection to mana had already convinced the temple she was a saint. Mahalan wondered if she could also wield divine power. He remembered the prophecy about the girl from the Calixtus bloodline, and Thisbe fit the description. After all, she uses both mana and divine power, so you could call her a saint. Lady Calixtus paused for a moment, lost in thought. But then she burst out laughing, explaining that wasn't nearly enough to be a saint. Mahalan immediately apologized, saying it was just the first thought that popped into his head. Then he remembered the always cheerful Saint Lady Estelle, and the whole situation struck him as pretty weird. Still, Estelle has an ability that no one else possesses. This is the true power of a saint, something no creature can stand against. It's a special gift, the one she'll use to save the whole damn world. Later, the Empire gets invaded by monsters, the result of some messed up, forbidden experiment. And then Saint Estelle shows up, using her ability to turn those demons into an army for defense. But Thisbe couldn't remember what was supposed to happen next, 'cause she read the end of the novel ages ago. Still, she wanted to believe that since Estelle's the main character, she's gotta win no matter what. Right now, she's got a different problem. She needs to catch this freaking criminal ASAP. Sora, her assistant, is now a suspect because of that wound on his arm. She shared this info with Mahalan, but he refused to believe it. He thought it was impossible that his lord, Sora, could be the real killer. Even Thisbe knew that was a long shot and turned him down flat. But Mahalan claimed the opposite, saying the Duke was head over heels for her. The idea was, he wanted to take out anyone who posed a threat to Thisbe. The girl saw where he was going with this, but reminded him Sora was her fiancé, and he trusts her completely, so she wasn't about to jump to conclusions. So the guild leader told her to just sit tight and see how things played out. Meanwhile, Sora was pissed that his lackey had lost sight of the target. Las screwed up again, and the Duke was trying to figure out how to make him pay for it. The assistant swore he'd done everything exactly as he was told. First, he roughed up the Zodiac leader real bad and left him to deal with Count Lynette. Even on death's door, though, the guild leader just vanished. Las couldn't lie to save his life, and a guy like him would never miss something like that. The fact that the head honcho booked it in that condition means someone had to help him. Sora put Las on probation until his arm heals up, and he was trying to figure out why this last target was such a pain. He wanted to nail this job perfectly, but he just couldn't finish him off. The Duke pulled out that cursed ring he bought at the black market auction. Rumor has it, the last owner of that thing offed her own lover with her bare hands. And Sora figured, even if it's really cursed, at least Thisbe would be by his side in his final moments. Since the first time he saw her, he's dreamed of her only looking at him. Just a few years back, he was crippled by social anxiety and the butler suggested teaching him how to network. But his mother, Vanessa Armand Salvatore, was against it, thinking her son was still too young. She demanded they not force him into anything, saying he just didn't like people. The servant didn't argue, but he was doing it all for the young duke. Vanessa stood her ground, hoping it would get easier for the boy to interact with others when he got older. She herself was very ill, and there was only one heir left in the family. But he could become a target for the lesser nobility, who only cared about their own gain. His mother planned to marry off her son as soon as possible. That was one of the reasons he avoided people. One day, the butler suggested the duke go for a walk. The saint was scheduled to arrive at the temple that day, and he suggested they go there. It was the perfect excuse to finally get the kid to leave the house. Sor actually wanted to go, and he knew it would do him some good. So he agreed, and was even surprised by how many people were at the temple. They were handing out gifts, and Sor was the only one there empty-handed. They say if you eat these gifts, you can receive a divine blessing. This news made the boy happy, because it might help his mom get better. He immediately went up to the priest and asked to receive some gifts. They gave him a piece of bread, which he wanted to take home and give to his mom. Turns out, this gift is consecrated and can't be taken outside. So you absolutely have to eat the gift you received right here in the temple. The kid agreed and pretended to eat, but he actually hid the bread. He raced home like a bat out of hell, knowing he'd swiped the sacred stuff. But his whole reason was to heal his mom with it. Sor was in such a rush, he didn't see Thisbe step out, and bam, they collided. The bread hit the floor, and the girl recognized the holy goods. And she got real curious how Sor managed to snag 'em, since you're not supposed to take those things outside. After the fall, the kid just sat there on his butt, totally stunned, trying to figure out what to say. He realized he screwed up big time, got caught stealing holy relics, and now his family's gonna pay the price. Sor was scared that when his mom found out he lied, she'd be super bummed. If that happened, she'd be done with him. And that was his worst nightmare. Huge tears streamed down his face, and he begged Thisbe not to tell anyone. She suddenly agreed, but told him to stop bawling because that would definitely get them caught. She confessed that she had also run away from the temple, and they were looking for her everywhere. But because of her delicate condition, the priests might just think she was resting somewhere. These kids both lied, and if they get caught, they're gonna be in deep trouble. But Thisbe didn't see anything wrong with stretching the truth a little. She hates being controlled by what people think and having to listen to them, because you gotta make your own destiny. She explained that you can do whatever you want, as long as the grown-ups don't catch you. Then she helped Sor get up, and he realized that no one had ever said anything like that to him before. His father was dead, and his mom was sick, and everyone was pinning their hopes on him, which was crushing him. He really dug what Thisbe said about not having to just go along with the crowd. That's when he remembered the story about the saint from Callistus he'd heard before coming here. Everyone said this saint was something special, acting way more mature than most adults. And seeing this girl in front of him, he realized he was looking at the saint from Callistus. She was holding the blessed bread and figured the kid must be hungry, since he took it from the temple. She gave it back to Soru, and he confessed it was for his mom. He wouldn't even think of taking a crumb for himself. He was giving it all to her. Thisbe noticed how bummed out he was and tried to cheer him up. She even asked if she could make it up to him for causing him to fall. Before long, Soru got a whole sack full of those blessed breads delivered to him. He couldn't believe he could just take all this. But Thisbe insisted he take the holy offerings. Suddenly, they heard someone calling out, searching for the saint. The girl said goodbye to Sor and asked him not to tell anyone he'd seen her. The boy watched her go for a while, until she disappeared around the corner. And he didn't know if they'd ever get to see each other again, even once. Just then, the maid noticed Lady Thisbe smiling at the bread and figured something good must have happened. The girl just explained that she'd been to the temple to give alms. And looking at that bread, she remembered the kid she'd met when she was just a little thing. Back then, they weren't allowed to take the offerings outside, saying they were consecrated. Sometimes the temple would hand out alms to try and get the people on their side. It was just bread, but they said it was blessed to keep thieves away. Thisbe noticed that the maid Emily was acting way too quiet today. She knew the maid was hiding something, but promised to keep it a secret. Emily agreed, explaining that the old duke had ordered her to stay silent, and she revealed that when Thisbe was away, the elders came to discuss adding a saint to the Calixt family. But his lordship was super pissed, even pulled out his sword and almost ran one of them through. Now Thisbe was totally lost, not understanding what her grandpa was trying to say. It wasn't clear to her why he was resisting accepting Estelle and kept making decisions like that. It seemed like he didn't give a damn about his own granddaughter. However, Emily was sure that the Duke loved Thisbe, even if he seemed aloof. Suddenly, the old man's voice boomed out, loud enough to hear from inside his office. He was demanding an investigation on behalf of Callisto to uncover the truth about the deaths. He also kept saying that Thisbe was his one and only precious granddaughter, so he's ready to do whatever it takes to clear her name. Thisbe even moved closer to the office, because she couldn't believe her ears, hearing that from her grandpa. After all, she's no longer a saint, just a murder suspect who's bringing shame on the family. But Grandpa's behavior showed that he valued her more than Estelle. Still, she figured it was just a temporary move, so she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Sometime later, Thisbe paid His Highness the Crown Prince another visit, convinced he'd baited her at the banquet, just so she'd come crawling back. Killian wasn't even trying to hide how stoked he was that she took the bait. He's curious to see what the ex-saint's gonna do, but Thisbe wasn't about to spill her guts to him. She even hinted that he was the real culprit, but that just cracked the prince up. He even told her to ask the big question, so she could nail him. She's still convinced the killer's someone with clout, someone who can make all the evidence disappear. And now she straight up asked Killian if he was behind all these crimes. For a second, the prince just stared at her with this knowing smirk. Then he asked her why she thought he was the one pulling the strings. Thisbe admitted he was at the top of her suspect list. And suddenly, His Highness didn't seem to be having such a good time anymore. He was there for her longer than anyone. And this is what she thinks of him? They were together so long, they forged a real bond. Killian knew only one person could make her suspect him like this. And that person is none other than Duke Sor Armand Salvatore himself. The prince figured this guy had really gotten into Thisbe's head with his words. Everything changed 3 years ago, when he showed up in her life. Back then, Killian asked her to be his partner, and gave her time to consider it. I mean, it would only benefit her to have someone like him by her side. He never got an answer. Then he heard about her engagement, and realized Thisbe dumped him. After that, she never tried to meet with him again. Like she was avoiding him. So the Crown Prince just couldn't wrap his head around why Lady Calyx dumped him. Now he figures she was miserable and wasted a whole lot of effort. Besides, he knows her well, so he was always sure she wasn't a killer. But right now, it doesn't even matter to him that she's the one pointing the finger. What matters is that she's not going to figure out the truth on her own. And he knew she was doing everything she could to clear her name. But the fact that Thisbe still hasn't caught the killer means she's in over her head. The girl confirmed that even the Calyx family can't figure out who the perp is. That's why she came to the prince today for the help he offered. Killian was even a little surprised that Thisbe actually asked for his help. But the next second, he burst out laughing. 'Cause he can't wait for her to come crawling to him. But since she's practically begging him, he promised he'd lend a hand. Truth is, Thisbe was setting a trap, trying to lure out the real bad guy. She knows that to stay out of the fight yourself, you gotta hire someone else to do the dirty work. The person on her side needs to have some serious pull. And the only one who fits the bill is Prince Killian. The Konkukji festival's coming up soon, and all the big shots from around the world will be there. They'll be watching the Saintess climb the sacred tower to light the flame. Thisbe decided to use this opportunity for her plan. If Killian's the culprit, she can expose him at the festival, or use him to catch the real killer. This is the perfect shot to nail this perp. But if her plan blows up, they're gonna pin the whole thing on her. Killian will judge her just like in the original story, punish her, and use it to make himself look like a hero. She had nothing left to lose, but now he's taken the bait. Suddenly, the prince wondered if her fiancé believed she was innocent. Thisbe was outraged, not understanding how that even crossed His Highness's mind. And the prince reminded her that she was convinced the real criminal was someone high up who believed in her innocence. And if her hunch is right, then Sir Salvatore is also a suspect. The girl kept protesting that Killian was smearing her fiancé's name, and he asked why the guy she trusts so much isn't lifting a finger to help her. Thisbe's argument was that she's just Sor's fiancé, not officially family yet. But honestly, Killian's words messed with her head about Sor. Up until now, she'd suspected everyone but him, because he's the one who's been there for her, always super kind. Thisbe just couldn't bring herself to accuse the guy who's always had her back. The prince just laughed, saying even a close friend now suspects him of wrongdoing. He couldn't believe Thisbe was so clueless she hadn't even considered the Duke. His Highness never liked Sor Salvatore, and he doesn't care how he influences Thisbe. Killian's convinced she doesn't need an escort, but someone with power to make her dreams a reality. And he thinks he's the perfect partner to make Thisbe's desires come true. As an ally, he felt it was his duty to warn her that someone totally wrong for her was hanging around. After a few seconds of silence, Killian repeated that he would help her out. But he added that he wasn't going to do it for free, which, let's be honest, was totally expected. The prince asked Thisbe to break off her engagement with Duke Salvatore. That was his only request, but it seemed way too audacious to her. Thisbe stared at the crown prince, bewildered, nervously rubbing her hands in her lap. Suddenly jumping up, she demanded to know what made him even think of such a thing. It would be way more advantageous for him to ask for a portion of the Calix family's special forces. Her breaking off the engagement wouldn't benefit him at all. It seemed more like a whim. Killian confessed that he really didn't like seeing Thisbe with Sor. But at that moment, his thoughts were still a total mystery to her. Later, heading home, the girl couldn't stop thinking about the prince's offer. But she was planning to skip town anyway, once her family kicked her to the curb. Still, she was curious why Killian was asking her to do this. She didn't know what he was up to, but to get his support, she'd have to play along. And she didn't see any way out, except to go along with his plan. Besides, if Sor stayed with her, his reputation would take a hit, so breaking off the engagement was the best thing. Getting back home, the girl could tell from the street that the mansion was buzzing, and Count Norbert, one of the most prominent elders of Calixt, came out to greet her. He's a die-hard supporter of accepting Estelle into the Calixt family, and originally, he was the one who wanted Thisbe gone. Girl reported that she went to the palace on business and asked what happened while she was gone. But the Count just gritted his teeth, saying that while rumors about her were flying around, she was carefree and gallivanting about the area. However, he only praised her for being mischievous, but asked her not to stir up a fuss. Thisbe understood what he was implying and praised him for his courage. She even admitted that she follows his instructions and tries to stay away from those out-of-touch old geezers, and also from greedy people who only want to get rich. That way, she subtly insulted him, without even raising her voice, and explained that she was talking about those who slander the aristocracy. But they both understood that she meant the Count, and that pissed him off. Norbert just stated that Thisbe doesn't have the slightest idea of what's really going on right now. And then he blew his top, yelling that Lady Iller wouldn't acknowledge being a saint. This news really floored Thisbe. She wasn't expecting that at all. Estelle's not only refusing to join the family, but also the baptism ritual. And while the Count was spitting mad, Thisbe was trying to figure out why Estelle did it. Then it hit her. Iller saw her summon the constellations, so that's why she refused the title. But if Estelle rejects it, a saint won't appear before the disaster kicks off. Estelle doesn't have a huge magic potential, so it needs to be boosted. That's why she needs the baptism ritual, so she can stand against the coming trouble. Thisbe decided to see her right away and ordered them to get the carriage ready. But the Count reminded her that she's known as a troublemaker, and her butting in will only make things worse. The girl stood her ground, explaining that she was the root cause of the whole mess. That's exactly why she was going to fix it, before things got completely out of hand. Otherwise, people would blow this whole thing way out of proportion. She was about to head out when her grandpa's voice boomed, telling her to stop right there. The Duke declared sternly that he wouldn't let his granddaughter meet with Lady Estelle. Count Norbert was just relieved the Duke showed up, because he had no idea how to stop Thisbe. He reminded everyone that she was the heir to the Calixt family. But then, out of nowhere, the Duke ordered the Count to get lost, saying he was interrupting his talk with his granddaughter. Norbert couldn't believe that the Duke, who had always been indifferent to her, was suddenly taking her side. Still, he agreed to leave, and even admitted he messed up. You could hear the hurt in his voice, but nobody even noticed. After he left, Thisbe asked if Grandpa really thought she was a threat to Estelle. He just explained that if she went to see the saint, the rumors would spread even faster. But the girl was adamant about talking to Lady Iller in person. She's sure that after they meet, Estelle will agree with her, and the rumors will die down. Seeing his granddaughter's determination, the old man tried a different approach. He's convinced Estelle wouldn't even let Thisbe through the front door, and she won't change her mind. After all these years, he couldn't exactly call his granddaughter his precious baby, but she was in danger. So, he decided to just hide her away and protect her with the family's strength. Still, Thisbe couldn't understand why he was only deciding to protect her now. It felt like things were way worse now than when she was a kid. Even back then, she felt helpless, hurt, and like she was struggling because she had nobody. With a hint of accusation, Thisbe pointed out that the Duke never gave a damn before. It's not that she doesn't trust her grandpa at all, but back when Estelle showed up, someone was trying to take her out permanently. The servant responsible for the, incident was dealt with, and the Duke cleaned house, fired everyone. He even checked on his granddaughter while she was recovering. Now all of a sudden, he's acting all kind and concerned? Thisbe wanted to believe he was genuine, but she kept flashing back to those old days, when he turned his back on her and just ignored her completely. This girl was pissed at him, but the truth is, if she bails now, her family can't protect her. And Thisbe snapped back, saying the Duke should have thought about protecting her a long time ago. Things would be different, and she wouldn't even be thinking about leaving home. The situation was a mess. Killian suddenly demanded they call off the engagement. Estelle's giving up her saint title, and the Duke suddenly got a real problem with Thisbe. It was a crazy day, even though she tried to stay out of everything. After all, she's not the Thisbe from the novel who was always causing trouble. In the original story, Killian and Almas turned their backs on her. Back when Thisbe was a kid, she got caught egging a carriage. That's the day the prince saw her true colors, and things were never the same between them. The Duke's changed too, probably because of what she did. And for some reason, he's suddenly helping her out. Part of Thisbe wanted to ditch this place since she was a kid, but another part wanted to stay. But now that she's totally different, the whole story could change too. And it's totally possible that even after Estelle shows up, Thisbe can keep living as Princess Calixt. That's why she didn't want to be hated and tried to live a good life. But right now, she's worried about Grandpa Almas and Prince Killian. The Duke was always indifferent to her, never had her back. And His Highness, who used to be her friend, turned his back on her when she needed him most. Because of those guys, she's made up her mind to get out of here. Thisbe thought she'd buried it, but she still gets this sick feeling whenever she remembers that day. It all went down 3 years ago, on the Crown Prince's coronation day. Thisbe knew Killian was going to be the Crown Prince, but seeing it all in person? It hit her with a tidal wave of mixed feelings. Back then, she figured it was because of the connection they had. In this world, every emperor needs a partner, and Killian asked Princess Thisbe to be that someone for him. He offered her the title of Empress, and she was on her way to give him her answer, because she was sure, even if she wasn't a saint, Killian would still choose her. Because to that guy, she was a woman first and a saint second. And if she's got someone like that by her side, maybe she won't even have to ditch the empire. When he hears what she says, he'll be stoked he called it right. Thisbe pictured him rolling his eyes like a total drama queen. But then she overheard people whispering about her special connection with the prince. Rumors are already flying that His Highness is totally chasing after her. Some folks think Killian only wants to marry her for the power play. And if she stops being useful, the prince will just toss her aside like garbage. Right then, Thisbe remembered that conversation he had with his buddy, the one she eavesdropped on as a kid. Back then, she was just a scared little kid and ran off. But now she's different, and she demanded those gossips explain what the heck they were talking about. As soon as they saw her, the two guys totally pretended they weren't talking about her at all. But Thisbe wasn't born yesterday, and she knew these guys were basically the prince's lackeys. She even called them out, saying one was from the Kell family, and the other was the Evergreen heir. And then she dropped the bomb that they were both part of the prince's inner circle. So she can't just brush off rumors coming from guys like them, not when they're so close to the guy. Then she asked Marquis Evergreen to pass a message on to Killian, that if all he sees her as is a way to get what he wants, then they're never gonna work out. After that, she left, and the Marquises started freaking out, not knowing what to do next. Kell suggested they just keep their mouths shut and hope everything blows over. Later that evening, Killian was expecting Thisbe, who was supposed to come and give him her answer. He was getting worried about her being late, even though he saw her at the coronation, and figured she just needed more time. Since that day, Thisbe hadn't left the house. She was barely even hearing news from Maholan. He kept telling her not to just hole up inside all day, every day. But the girl was in a foul mood and didn't want to see anyone. Maholan didn't challenge her choice, but he still wanted to help somehow. And then he remembered the news that her fiancé was arriving in the capital any day now. Turns out Thisbe had no clue, and this news totally freaked her out. She didn't feel like leaving the house, and she didn't think her fiancé would be back so soon. Soar was tied up with family business at the time, so they hadn't seen each other yet. And until that happened, Thisbe decided to play it safe, just in case. So, on the day they planned, when she was waiting at the cafe, Soar showed up totally winded. And he apologized, pretty loudly, saying he was running a little late. But realizing he was yelling, the guy just felt even more awkward. Then Thisbe goes like, she just got there herself, so he shouldn't sweat it. At first, these two were just going through the motions, you know? But the more they hung out, the more she noticed herself chilling out. Talking to Soar was way different than the usual high society BS that always wore her out. And from the day she met him, she felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. And whenever things got really rough, Soar Salvatore was there to comfort her. Sometimes she even caught herself missing him a little. A magic scroll caught her eye, and she decided to leave him a quick note. Getting closer, she saw it glowing and realized Soar had already written to her. His words were beautiful as always, expressing his warm feelings. Turns out they were both reminiscing about their first meeting today, back when he first came to the capital to see her 3 years ago. Soar remembers every moment he spent with Thisbe back then, and not just then. The first meeting was at a cafe on the edge of town at 3 o'clock, and it was all decked out with flowers. Thisbe was surprised her fiancé remembered details like that. She reminded him how flustered he was back then. Back then, Thisbe wondered if he even liked her, but he couldn't bring himself to say, 'cause he got all shy and they changed the subject to flowers. Still, Soar was flustered and kept stumbling over his words, even when talking about his favorite cakes. Back then, they'd told him about his engagement to a girl who's a saint, and he couldn't believe it was the same saint he'd been dreaming about. He was bursting with joy and excitement that day, but now he can answer any question she throws at him. And then, Thisbe asked why he wrote her a letter today. The question seemed a little odd to Soar, and he hesitated before answering. Thisbe figured she'd gone too far, and he was really struggling to come up with a response. She was about to text back that she was just kidding, but then he replied that Soar was worried about her. The girl really liked hearing that, 'cause it was exactly what she wanted to hear. Salvatore was dying to know how she was doing, even though he knew he couldn't do a damn thing to help. Right then, Thisbe started missing him even more, and just had to see him. They agreed to meet in the garden, and Soar was supposed to come out when he heard singing. She wasn't allowed to leave the house right now, but she really, really wanted to. So, to make it happen, she tried to summon the Pisces constellation. Thisbe chanted a quick spell and called on Alrisha. A little fish appeared, one that hadn't been in the human world for ages. Thisbe needed her ability to connect everything so she could get to one specific place. Soar, getting a reply from his bride, couldn't believe she'd head over to the Salvatores. The guy remembered that the Duke's curfew was already in effect at this hour. Just to be safe, I told the butler to make sure nobody's wandering the halls. 'Cause Thisbe's not the type to make promises she can't keep. And the fact that she'd come all this way just to see him, that really made Sora happy. Soon, he heard a melody, and with an excited look on his face, he hurried out to the garden. There, on a bench in the moonlight, with a light shawl over her shoulders, Thisbe Calixt was already waiting for him. For a moment, she kept humming the tune, her eyes closed, and when she finished, she asked Sora if he liked the serenade. He was so into it, he practically dropped to his knee. It was like a dream. Then, gently, as a sign of respect, he kissed her hand and invited her inside. The guy had rushed to get ready, but he hoped his bride-to-be would be comfortable. But to the girl, everything seemed so fancy, like he'd been prepping for a week. He even draped his jacket over her shoulders so she wouldn't freeze, because the room was just starting to warm up, and the air was still chilly. After getting her settled on the couch, Soar went to grab something to drink, and Fishy noticed that he hadn't even asked how Thisbe got here so fast. The girl suddenly realized that if he did ask, she'd have to spill the beans about her abilities. But her fiancé didn't ask anything. He was just happy to see her. She really dug his thoughtfulness and the way he looked after her. And while he was busy, Thisbe quietly thanked Fishy for bringing her here. The Pisces constellation managed to disappear before Soar got back with the glasses. He brought over a drink, something to warm his guest up real quick. Just then, a servant knocked, bringing what the Duke had asked for. Perfect timing, and Soar told them to bring it all in. The servants hauled in a few boxes and a warm blanket for the lady, plus some booze and a light dessert. Thisbe was totally surprised, but she was digging the surprise. Once they were alone again, Soar admitted the room was missing a few things for a proper visit. So, he had all this set up to make sure Thisbe was comfortable. The girl was honestly enjoying herself so much, she didn't even want to leave. Soar also confessed that he'd been thinking about her the whole time he was getting everything ready. He also wanted Thisbe to come visit more often, and he's willing to go all out for every visit, because it actually makes him happy. Speaking about it, the young Duke gave a genuine smile. Then, he confessed that all the gifts in the boxes and the toys were specifically for Thisbe. What's more, some of those boxes had some seriously expensive and trendy jewelry. But besides all that, she really loved the paintings and books on the shelves. So, he promised to send it all over tomorrow, even that teddy bear she was totally digging. Thisbe couldn't believe he was ready to give her anything she asked for. But the guy confirmed he was ready to give her absolutely everything he owns, if that's what she wanted. He sounded totally sincere, and he even put his hand over his heart. But the girl still had her doubts, because he couldn't possibly know what she might ask for. And then, he declared he'd give up his status, his fortune, hell, even himself. Promising to hand over everything, down to the last crumb, Soar took her hand and leaned in close. All the while, he sadly knew that with every move he made, she was taking a step back. It always felt like he was just pushing her further away. But now, in his darkest hour, this girl came to him. And now, he's got a shot to tell her everything he's been holding back. Soar didn't want to lose her, so he let her ask for whatever she wanted. For a moment, Thisbe wanted to drop everything and just trust this guy. Because right now, she can see his unwavering love so clearly. Just a little more, and she'll reach for Soar, and he'll follow her anywhere. But if that happens, this guy's life is going to be in serious danger. Thisbe didn't want that, and confessed she couldn't do that to him. She can't let the same tragedy happen that went down in the original story. Soar freaked out when his bride pulled her hand away and stepped back. But she explained it wasn't him, that she thought he was amazing, because no one had ever supported her like he did, and no one ever would. In a sad voice, Thisbe admitted he was a really good guy, and that she wished him happiness. Everything inside Soar just blew up, because her words sounded like goodbye. She explained they could have had something if she didn't have to rely on him, and that she wasn't sure she wouldn't just use him to make her escape. The Duke wasn't giving up, and wanted to know if Phoebe would consider a relationship if things were different. She promised she'd think about it, and then headed home. Left alone, Soar fell into a funk, knowing he couldn't even hold her hand now. Then, he called for Lass, and ordered him to prepare for a meeting with the guy he spoke to last time. His expression hardened, and he geared up to meet with the renegades. Later, he and his assistant, cloaked and masked, set out on another mission. The next morning, Phoebe was kicking herself for even considering using Soar yesterday. If she went through with it, she'd be no better than Killian. Besides, she'd never seen her fiancé so bummed out before. His question kept replaying in her head. To consider a relationship if things changed. She couldn't say no to him, but she was scared she'd given him the wrong idea, since she was still planning on leaving. But because of it, she was able to make a final decision. A couple minutes later, Emily brought her a basin of warm water to wash up with. Thisbe thanked her, and also asked her to deliver a letter to His Highness. And with it, a request that the prince visit her as soon as possible. Killian thought the request was pretty bold, but he showed up anyway, and in a good mood, too. However, Thisbe couldn't leave the estate just yet due to circumstances, but she needed to see him, and His Highness figured it was because she was ready to accept his proposal. The Founding Day Festival is in 2 weeks, and Thisbe explained that Saint Estelle was refusing to participate. This isn't just going to screw over the temple, but the whole imperial family, especially those directly responsible for the preparations. In other words, Prince Killian's going to be the first one to feel the heat, and Phoebe's saying she can fix this mess, but of course, it ain't free. She'll do it as payment for the prince's help, instead of breaking off the engagement. It's not like she doesn't want to end the engagement, though. She'll dump him herself. She just doesn't want Killian getting between her and Soar. The girl cleverly sidestepped the prince's condition, and that kind of bummed him out. And her offer made it look like he was the one benefiting more. But now she's got the whole deal completely under her thumb. Looks like His Royal Highness is the one doing the begging now. He already knew the Saintess was backing out, and that the royal family would take the hit, but probably wasn't good enough. He needed her locked in. Thisbe told him not to sweat it, because she had a hunch why Estelle was refusing. Lady Iller isn't seeing anyone right now, but Thisbe's sure she'll make an exception. So, she guaranteed that nobody but her could fix this mess. Killian saw this girl wasn't backing down, and after a beat, he asked her to lay out her plan. For a while, Thisbe explained the ins and outs, without showing her ace in the hole, of course. But she did let on that she was setting a trap for the perp. Shouldn't be too hard, since the killer always uses the same playbook. He only takes out guys who disrespect Lady Calixt. Besides, right now everyone's focused on her and Estelle. The whole misunderstanding about their bad blood started at that banquet at the palace. After that, rumors started flying that Estelle was giving up being a saint because of threats from Thisbe. And if Iller shows up at the festival, this creep's definitely gonna try to attack her. With that massive crowd, it'll be tough to figure out who did it, and he's not gonna pass up that chance. It'll be the perfect crime, plain and simple. Thisbe's plan is for Estelle to go into the shrine and light the fire. But she won't be going in alone. Lady Calixt is going with the saint. Hearing that, the prince thought she was nuts, 'cause there's no way anyone would let her do that. Only one person can carry the sacred flame, that's the rule. And even being a prince ain't gonna help, 'cause the temple makes the rules. But Thisbe didn't see a problem. She just told him to lean on him. The big thing is, we gotta keep all this under wraps till the festival. Then, on the day, Killian's gotta make sure Thisbe and Estelle get inside the temple. He also needs to sneak his guys around the whole area for security. And when the killer makes a move on Estelle, Killian and his men grab him. She's got a little something special planned for the perp. A constellation summon. With that power, she can nail the real killer. The prince knew if he tried to argue, Thisbe wouldn't listen anyway. So, he finally agreed to do things her way. Now all she had to do was get Grandpa's permission, who just happened to see her seeing the prince off and wanted to know what he was doing here. Meanwhile, Thisbe was racking her brain, trying to figure out how to leave the estate, 'cause sneaking out was a no-go since she'd be gone all day. The festival is a huge deal, it's gonna last the whole day. So to go with Estelle, she needs a pass to leave. She just told Grandpa she was just catching up with an old friend. This was the first decent conversation she'd had with the Duke since that blow-up. And Thisbe was feeling super awkward, too ashamed to even look him in the eye, let alone ask for something. As much as she wanted to ask for permission, she couldn't get a single word out. She just gave a polite bow and said she was heading to her room. Given the situation, she knew she couldn't get to the Saintess without the constellation's power. Just then, the Duke asked if his granddaughter had any plans for the evening. Thisbe actually flinched, but he just suggested they have dinner together. At the table that evening, she tried again to find the right moment to talk, and she was super surprised when her grandpa made the first move. At first, he just asked what she thought about meeting Estelle. He figured out that's why Thisbe had invited His Highness here. The girl tried to hide her nervousness, so no one would find out about the festival plans. She needed to play it cool, like nothing serious had happened. She did admit she wanted to meet Estelle, and that the prince wasn't involved. By covering up some things with lies, she hoped the Duke wouldn't notice anything. But Almaz didn't blame her for anything, because despite everything, she always went all in when she wanted something. He even liked that her stubbornness made her so much like her father. Grandma Thisbe always tried to knock some sense into that bonehead, and she always begged him not to risk his neck, because he wasn't alone. She also just asked him to tell the family if he ever needed help. Back then, Almaz didn't understand why his wife kept repeating this to their son. But when their son died, the Duke regretted that he never told him how much he cared, and how messed up he was when he found him inside that wrecked carriage. His son's wife also died, but the kid miraculously survived. Taking it as a sign, the Duke, tears streaming down his face, cradled her in his trembling arms. And he knew in that moment, God had given him a chance to protect this child. But now, with Phoebe in danger, the Duke is powerless to help her. He can only protect her as long as she stays on the estate, and until the public calms down. That's why the old man asked her to give him a chance to keep her safe. Right then, Phoebe noticed that her grandpa was opening up to her for the first time, something that never happened in the novel. She still couldn't forgive the Duke completely, but she also wanted to be honest with him. So, the girl confessed that she was planning on leaving the Empire, and that she'd been thinking about skipping town for a long time now. The Duke was pretty damn floored by that revelation. Almost as floored as he was by the news that Frisbee wanted to head to the Kingdom of Seas, the girl declared she was going there to study divine powers and magic. She even showed him how she could levitate a butter knife, just so the old man would believe her. Frisbee used to want to keep it a secret, but now things were different, and the Duke finally understood why she'd agreed to put Estelle in the family registry and give her the Saintess spot. It was all so Frisbee could get the heck out of here. The girl explained that she just couldn't find happiness here, no matter how hard she tried. And the Duke realized there was no point in holding her back, so he gave her permission to do whatever she wanted, which means Frisbee can meet up with Estelle without any trouble. Alma's just figured he'd announce he was going to see her himself, to avoid any unnecessary complications. But even so, meeting the Saintess isn't gonna be a walk in the park. Everyone knows Lady Estelle doesn't receive visitors. Period. It'd look pretty sus if some lady who just debuted gets a pass to see her. That's why Count Iller's trying to protect Lady Estelle too, like Almas protects his granddaughter. Meanwhile, that Count was chewing Estelle out, totally ticked off, 'cause the Saintess made a certain decision without even running it by him. He was demanding she haul her butt to the temple and beg forgiveness for what she said. But Estelle wasn't backing down, claiming she's not a saint at all. Once, when she was 10, she got lost in the woods. Lost and trying to find her way back, she wandered along the mountain trails. Estelle wanted to get back before dark, but then she ran smack into some monsters. Before that day, she'd only heard stories about them, and she totally freaked out. She wanted to bolt, but her legs just wouldn't move, figures. After a moment of panic, she suddenly realized they were giving her mana. The monsters were actually pretty friendly and seemed like they were trying to help her out, and the fear she felt when she first saw them quickly faded away. Then she followed them down the path for a while, and soon they reached a village. And recently, at the reception, she saw something and was sure it wasn't her imagination. Those blue figures the princess summoned seemed happy to see her, just like when Estelle ran into those monsters as a kid. And she figured the princess just hadn't unlocked her powers yet. That's why Estelle kept saying she wasn't the prophesied hero. She couldn't take the saint's spot until she talked to the princess. The Count pointed out that Frisbee's a nobody right now, even if the Duke's protecting her with everything he's got. Still, we can't ignore the chance she might become the next Duchess. But that's just a long shot, and if it actually happened, people would laugh. But that's exactly why he thinks Estelle has to restore the Calixta dukedom's tarnished reputation. The girl insisted she'd seen Frisbee's unique abilities, and she kept arguing with her uncle that she wasn't the main hero of the prophecy. She didn't even want to consider her own abilities as proof of that, and the Earl explained that her statement could be seen as a declaration of war between the imperial family and the temple. Because by calling a saint a criminal suspected of murder, she's insulting the temple. The Earl didn't want the Calixte family name to be further tarnished, and until Estelle changes her mind, he's forbidden her from leaving the estate. Just then, a servant knocked on the door and announced that the Earl had a visitor. He figured it was someone from the temple, here to discuss the upcoming festival ceremony. He didn't want to see that kind of guest and ordered him to be sent away. But the servant explained that the head of the Calixte family had come to visit in person, who immediately walked in and gave the suddenly agitated Earl a critical look. Ilmas wanted to talk to Estelle about why she refused to acknowledge she was a saint. He added that he came himself since his granddaughter couldn't leave the estate, and the Earl explained that she saw Frisbee using divine powers under the moonlight. Then the Duke asked to be taken to where he could speak with the saint. The Earl was actually pleased. For him, it was a chance to start handling the Calix family's external affairs sooner. A little later, Estelle sat timidly before the Duke, her hands folded in her lap. He asked her to look closely at him and see who he really was. The girl was confused, and the man spoke in Frisbee's voice, explaining that it was her all along. She had to take on her grandfather's form, or the Earl wouldn't have let her in. Understanding what was happening, Estelle exclaimed in surprise that she wasn't wrong. But Frisbee clapped a hand over her mouth quick, so no one would hear and interrupt them. Estelle was curious and admitted she'd used a power kinda like divine magic to summon the Gemini constellation and create an illusion. With every word, Estelle was more and more convinced of the princess's incredible power, and even more sure that Frisbee Calixte, not her, was the real saint. Estelle admitted she saw her during the reception, but it wasn't on purpose. Frisbee explained it was just a misunderstanding, and she wasn't going to accuse her of anything. After all, there are other people besides her who can control constellations. But Estelle's the only one who can control monsters, so she's the true saint. Still, she wasn't so sure, since barely anyone can even use magic. If people only knew Fizby's power, they'd stop bad-mouthing her and recognize her as a true saint. Estelle just couldn't figure out why Lady Calyx was hiding her abilities, so she started begging her to explain why she was acting like this. Fizby sat there for a while, lost in thought. Trying to find the right words, she needed to somehow convince Estelle to acknowledge herself as a saint, and right now there was only one way. So the Duchess confessed that she was planning to leave the Empire. Because, let's be real, wherever she goes, with her abilities, they'll just declare her a saint again. And if her talent gets revealed, the Empire won't let her go so easily this time. The Temple and the Imperial family will want to use her for their own gain. That's why Fizby decided to leave, so she wouldn't be used again. So, Estelle thought the whole time that the princess didn't know about her powers, and she figured the princess was unfairly robbed of the saint title. But now she gets it, she was wrong. Still, she's still not sure she's saint material herself. And she's freaked out, because even the princess, who spent years building up her rep, got taken down in a heartbeat. Lady Estelle's just a nobody compared to her, and it's scary. But then Thisbe declared, it doesn't even matter if Estelle's a good fit or not. She's already been recognized as the saint. So, forget what people say. Nothing's gonna change that now. Thisbe remembers that an outstanding saint will be able to handle the disaster that's hit the continent. Now she's saying Estelle's totally gonna crush her mission. Lady Iller herself wanted to bail the whole time and kept telling everyone she wasn't the saint. She never wanted to be her, because it's a total spotlight magnet. All she wanted was her old life back, but now she's on board with the princess. We can't keep ignoring the truth and no more running away, especially since she promised herself she'd stand with Thisbe not long ago. So now she's sworn to show up at the founding festival, to enter the shrine, go through the ritual, and officially take on the title of Holy Woman of the Empire. With that settled, Thisbe got ready to lay out her plan. Sometime later, as evening was turning to night, Thisbe headed out to meet a friend. The second she opened the door, a familiar shadow greeted her. Mahaloon stepped right out of the shadows and gave her a warm welcome. First thing she did was apologize for taking so long to sneak away from her family's watch. Then she thanked him for helping her disappear for a good chunk of time. The guy wasn't mad at her, 'cause not just anyone could be trusted with this kind of gig. Plus, he was surprised she even considered asking Lady Estelle for help. Thisbe laid out her whole plan, where she'd be the bait to catch the perp. Just a few hours ago, Estelle was totally taken aback by the idea. It was a huge risk, and Thisbe promised to keep Lady Iller safe. But she told her not to worry about her, and just focus on nailing the killer. And she swore she could handle herself. Thisbe used to think Estelle was just some clueless newbie who'd just arrived in the capital, and she didn't even realize she was capable of thinking like that. But Mahalan wasn't surprised, because otherwise, Thisbe wouldn't have told her about her plan. She would have done everything herself, especially since she can't fully trust people. Her trust has grown a little now, but she still shouldn't let her guard down. She was also happy that Mahalan managed to find out what she asked for. The festival was a little over a week away, but he had gathered all the useful intel. The biggest problem at the festival will be Lord Lynette, and until they catch the perpetrator, they can't stop the attempts on his life. The guy Mahalan met at the banquet vanished, but other mercenaries are showing up. The guild is taking care of these assassins and keeping a constant watch. Mahalan's been run ragged, but today, it all ends. Thisbe's decided to ship Lord Lynette out of here, save her buddy the headache. Then she started asking about the locations of the recent killings. All these spots are right in the heart of the capital, which gives us another lead, that the perps craving the spotlight wants everyone to know. So if Lynette skips town, this creep won't be able to get to him anymore. Mahalan doubted the Lord would agree to leave, and his old man would probably weasel him out of it anyway. But man, the rumors about Lord Lynette's behavior are getting out of control. Usually the Margrave squashes him, but there's a shot to really put him on blast at this event. We're going to use Duchess Ferentia's annual fancy dinner to do it. This event's for young couples looking to tie the knot, and they get advice there. Lynette could totally hit this thing, and nobody would suspect Thisbe and Mahal. A duchess's word carries serious weight in high society, especially when it comes to her events. If Lynette screws up there, not even his dad can save him, and he's out of the social scene for good. Then the Lord will realize he can't always hide behind his father's influence. Mahal loved this plan so much, he was itching to get started on the assignment. When the day of the gala arrived, all the young lovebirds gathered together. Duchess Ferentia kicked off the event with a toast to future unions. And with the clinking of glasses, she wished everyone blessings from above. Thisbe came to the evening with her fiancé, which she was grateful for. Soryu felt awful he couldn't spend the whole day with her. He really did. He just had some other stuff he needed to take care of, and he wouldn't be able to escort his bride back to the estate. But she wasn't mad at all. After all, she was the one who called him out of the blue. Plus, they hadn't seen each other since that secret rendezvous. Up until now, Thisbe had always treated Soryu like just some fiancé her family picked out. But then she overheard what he really thought of her, so now she's way more on edge than usual. And while they were talking, another young dude strolled up. It was the handsome Count Jeff, with a cute girl with long red hair on his arm. Soryu's never seen this count before, but Thisbe knows him pretty well. She introduced him as a close friend, and the girl next to him as his fiancée, Lady Cordelia. So these two lovebirds invited Thisbe and Sor to a fancy dinner, and the Count greeted the Duke all polite and stuff. Lady Calix didn't even let him finish, just jumped right in and cut him off. She reminded everyone they needed to chat, making it sound like he'd asked for it. But get this, underneath that young Count's face was actually her buddy, Mahalan. Thisbe herself had asked him to come to the dinner when they met up. I mean, it's no sweat for him to whip up a shady persona, right? At first, he was like, showing up at that thing would be asking for trouble. It'd be like shouting from the rooftops that he's the head of the guild. But Thisbe needs someone there to steer things the way she wants them to go. Mahalan suggested she just ask a lady friend or another buddy she knew. But then he remembered she wouldn't have those kinds of connections. Even Estelle wouldn't go for it. So he agreed to help himself, even if it meant his face plastered on every wanted poster in the Empire. But the lady told him not to sweat the face thing, because that was a problem they could handle. Said she'd call on the power of the Gemini constellation to help out. She even showed Mahalan her skills, which almost made him faint from shock. The girl explained that Gemini could change the caster's appearance. So now Mahalan was playing his part in disguise, acting according to their plan. Suddenly, he gave the signal when he spotted their target, Lord Lynette, who showed up to the party with his fiancée, Marcia Ivrea. She's the Duke's eldest daughter, but her family's fallen on hard times, so she had to get engaged to the son of a powerful count. Those two just walked past, and Mahalan figured they'd been spotted. Then, out of nowhere, the young Earl himself strolls up, taunting her about seeing the killer princess. He couldn't believe she showed her face here, considering her reputation. Her fiancé blew a gasket and was about to put Lynette in his place, but Thisbe stopped him. She told him not to worry and promised she'd handle it herself. Then she told the Earl she was surprised to hear something like that coming from him. Lynette's face tightened up, and he demanded she explain herself. That's when Thisbe pointed out that this evening was specifically for engaged couples, which definitely doesn't apply to someone who's swapping partners every other night. The Earl immediately got flustered, insisting it was just ridiculous gossip, nothing to believe. Thisbe's been burned by gossip before, so she only trusts what she sees with her own eyes. And what she's seen from Lynette, separate from all the rumors, just proves her point, because he even came onto her once. That confession sent the young Earl into a rage. He was barely holding it together, but it was true. He felt inferior to Sor, and tried to steal Thisbe away. This news totally blindsided Mahalan, since he doesn't get out much and had no clue. Thisbe decided not to make a scene back then, because the Earl already had a fiancée. But Sor decided he'd had enough and invited the Lord to have a serious chat. Hearing his fiancée had to deal with that kind of crap just set him off. Lynette got visibly nervous and started assuring Marcia it was ancient history, but she just wanted to get out of there and apologize to Thisbe for her fiancé's behavior. Besides, this isn't the place for a brawl. It's an important event. The Count listened to her. He just needed to hang in there a little longer to marry her and become a duke. And he announced that he agreed to back down, because that's what his bride wanted. But he warned that he wouldn't tolerate that kind of disrespect in the future. Thisbe didn't even try to stop him, because everything was going according to her plan. And just as Lynette took a few steps, a girl with long black hair appeared in front of him. Seeing her, he froze, because she could expose his secret to everyone. The girl just noticed him and smiled sweetly, like she didn't expect to see him there. Without saying a word, the Count's face darkened even more, and grabbing her by the hand, he dragged her away. Ditching his fiancée? Man, people are gonna say he's a total player. It was a bonehead move. Even Fizby didn't think he'd dump Marcia that fast. And all he did was make everyone trust him even less. Fizby actually felt bad for the girl, just silently watching her fiancé walk away, totally crushed. So she told Mahalan, Soar, and Cordelia to go after Lunette. Try to smooth things over, because this could blow up into a major mess. Marcia ended up leaving too, so Fizby decided to talk to her herself, even though she really wanted to give the Count a piece of her mind right then. She just knows what it's like to feel alone in a crowded, fancy ballroom. It didn't take long to find Marcia, sitting alone on a couch against the wall. Tears were streaming down her face, and she felt like a complete fool. She figured Thisbe was here to laugh at her, but Thisbe shot back, saying she's called a killer herself. Still, Marcia decided she'd shut it down right away if the lady tried to coddle her. But Thisbe wasn't listening, and politely offered the girl a handkerchief. After all, she was taught that helping those in need is what makes a noble. Plus, she noticed that Marcia didn't have a tissue to wipe away her tears. The young Duchess silently took the silk square, and then thanked her and apologized for her behavior, saying she was just thrown off. She should have been ready for this, but she was hoping Lord Lunette would at least try to put on a show of being decent. She mostly stayed out of his shady dealings, even though it bugged her. She also mentioned the Count even brought that dark-haired woman to the county. This lady's name is Camilla, and Lunette started grilling her about why she showed up. But she just got indignant, told him not to yell, and demanded he explain his visit. Then she pulled out an envelope, saying he'd sent her the invitation himself. Lunette couldn't believe his eyes and started examining it, realizing someone had set him up. And Camilla told him not to get so worked up about it. She was sure he was bored with that girl who was supposed to be his fiancée anyway. She even suggested they stop hiding their relationship, since everyone already knew what was going on. But the Count just got angrier. He demanded Camilla not get any ideas. There's no way they can have a serious relationship. She's just a commoner. That's when she threatened to go back inside and spill all their secrets. And if she did, the young Earl would be in a world of trouble. Lunette totally lost it that this girl dared to try and blackmail him. And when she reached for his face, he shoved her away, furious, which made her stumble backwards right towards a fence with sharp spikes. Meanwhile, Mahalan was roaming the streets, looking for Earl Lunette. He was cursing under his breath about how all these scumbags are so slippery. He considered using his powers to find the Lord faster. Suddenly, he spotted Sora, who was for some reason out on the street with Cordelia. With the Duke close by, Mahalan decided to use his gift discreetly. But the second he started working his fingers, Sora grabbed his hand. He noticed something was off and demanded to know what the hell that was. It looked to him like that guy, Earl Jeff, was using magic. But their conversation was cut short by a sudden scream, and they both turned to look. It was a man's scream, and Sora figured they were too late. Other people started heading toward the noise, even Fizby and Marcia. Near the fence, Lunette was sitting on his butt, totally freaked and shaking with fear, and he was frantically yelling that he just gave her a little shove, and it was a terrible accident. Fizby didn't immediately get what happened or who this jerk had pushed, but remembering who he left with, she figured it out and moved closer to make sure. Her fears were confirmed. In a small pond nearby, Camilla's body was lying face down, and judging by appearances, this girl was already dead, because she wasn't showing any signs of life. Soon the coroner showed up and officially recorded the time of Lady Camilla's death. She died at 8:34 p.m. Then the Duchess approached the Earl, who was still shaking, sitting on the floor, and demanded an explanation of how it all happened. Madame Ferentia's face was twisted with outrage and fury. She held out a piece of paper that had been found on the deceased and demanded an explanation of what it was. Seeing the dinner invitation from him, Lunette suddenly went pale. The Duchess was furious about this forgery because she herself hadn't invited Camilla. The Lord swore up and down that he didn't send anything like that to the girl. He claimed Princess Thisbe was just trying to smear his name. Sore stepped in to defend the girl, demanding the Earl back up his accusations with proof. And he reminded everyone that Lunette dumped his own fiancée, and Thisbe went after Marcia out of sympathy. So, the Lord has no right to accuse her based solely on his gut feelings. Actually, Thisbe's plan was for Lunette's mistress to expose his cheating ways. But, unexpectedly, even for her, the girl passed away, totally changing the game. Then Marcia spoke up, confirming that Thisbe was with her when it happened. At that moment, Lady Calixt realized that there were people who still believed in her, and Lunette started threatening that Marcia's family would also pay the price if he went down. But the girl wasn't scared, and flat out told him they were done. This turn of events left the Count totally blindsided. It would wreck his plans, but he still kept threatening Marcia's family. He also started insisting that the girl just fell, totally by accident. But then a witness showed up, claiming to have proof that wasn't true. Lady Cordelia stepped forward, saying she saw the whole thing go down. She was strolling near the pond and noticed a shoe floating in the water. Then she heard a woman's voice, calling for help. At that moment, Lunette was holding Camilla's hand, trying to pull her up and telling her to be quiet. But then he realized if she died, no one could rat him out for what he did. The girl herself started begging him to save her, promising she wouldn't tell anyone anything. Those two were far enough away from Cordelia that she couldn't hear what they were saying. But then she saw the young Earl just shove the dark-haired girl back into the water, and with a wicked grin, he announced that he had to marry March, and that Camilla should have thought twice before showing up with a fake invitation. Cordelia went on to describe how desperately the girl clung to him, even scratching the Lord's hand. The men grabbed him, and sure enough, there were scratches on the back of his hand. That was proof of what the witness had said. Duchess Ferentia realized that Lord Lunette had committed a serious offense and ordered her soldiers to arrest him immediately. Mahalan shifted back to his usual form, and Thisbe thanked the Gemini constellation. The guy geared up to leave, because he had another piece of business to take care of. Before this, he only knew Sor from Thisbe's stories, but he sensed something. He sensed that Duke Salvatore was a seriously bad dude, but he didn't want to freak Thisbe out with his suspicions just yet, not after Killian's betrayal. He decided to gather more intel first, and bam, he vanished into the shadows. Then Sor walked up to her, and she suggested they get out of there. The girl was bummed that all their hangouts ended on such a weird note. But the Duke told her not to beat herself up about it, because it wasn't her fault. And he reminded her about the promise she'd made him not too long ago, what she'd think about their relationship if the tables turned. Sor promised her he'd shut down the rumors and make sure she could always smile. All she had to do was wish for it. And Thisbe, because she was unwinding after a rough day, and because Sor's words were like a sweet dream, she said something she shouldn't have. She agreed to his offer, figuring she had the right to dream a little. After that, Sor held her close and promised to keep his word, even if he had to turn everything around her into a living hell to do it. The Duke was dead serious, and he had his reasons. Later, on the way home, Las wondered what Sor was going to do with Lunette. He decided to leave him be, figuring he wasn't even worth the trouble of someone worrying about his death, especially since the press is all over Thisbe right now, and his death would just backfire. Instead, he wants to eliminate another source of trouble, Estelle, who accepted the invitation to Kunkuki. Even though she turned down the position at first, and then took it again, it's actually better for Sora this way. That way, he doesn't have to change his plans, so he headed to the heretic leader. Soon the festival day arrived, and the temple was welcoming the saint, Estelle. It was almost her turn to go out, but the girl was super nervous. She was worried if the perp Thisbe told her about was actually there. The princess told her not to sweat it, since that's exactly why she was there. When the torch lights up on the sacred mountain, its light can be seen even in the imperial palace. Only priests performing the ritual are present inside the sanctuary itself. Estelle was still sweating the fact that there were two holy men here right now. She was worried the priests would try to kick Lady Calixt out. But Calixt assured her she had something up her sleeve for this situation. Nothing to worry about. His Highness Killian was supposed to help her out with this. Back at the palace, the guests were buzzing about Iller showing up at the ceremony. They'd heard rumors that Princess Calixt had been giving her a hard time. A lot of people figured Thisbe wouldn't show, and was probably back in her room, tearing the place apart. Suddenly, Duke Salvatore strolled up to the people gossiping about it. He wanted to know what they were all yakking about that was so interesting. The ladies got flustered and said they were just talking about the Konkukji ceremony. But Sor knew what they were whispering about. They were just too chicken to say it to his face. Deep down, he was cooking up a plan to make sure there was only one saint left in the whole empire. Real soon, two lords started blabbing about how the princess was hiding out in the sanctuary. Sor overheard and totally lost it, but demanded they back up their claim. The guys were practically swearing on their lives that Thisbe was definitely there. Salvatore freaked out about his fiancée, who could be in serious danger now. Meanwhile, some priests showed up at the prince's place, raising hell about his decision regarding the saint. For a second, he even regretted agreeing to this whole thing and not giving the temple a heads up. But he hoped it would all be worth it, if it meant getting Thisbe on his side. Right now, he just told those priests to keep it civil. And don't forget who they're standing in front of. The freaking emperor of this country. The priests immediately started apologizing for daring to raise their voices. But they're still confused about why His Highness let the princess into the sanctuary. Because after a stunt like that, it's going to be tough for him to keep things smooth with the temple. Killian just flipped their outrage back on them, saying Thisbe isn't exactly a saint. It's their screw-up that made the princess the way she is, and then she got stripped of her title. And he declared they should be grateful, because thanks to Thisbe, Estelle agreed to participate. Killian knows how the priests were pressuring Lady Iller, so he just brought the only person Estelle would even agree to meet. He clarified that it was Princess Calix, which is why he sent her in there. The priests exchanged a silent look, realizing His Highness was right. After all, the shrine is the temple's responsibility, and the ceremony's success depends on it. And if word gets out that the people in charge couldn't convince the saint, the temple's reputation will take a nosedive. So the prince took on that responsibility himself. And it really ticks him off that the priests kicked up such a fuss without even thinking about it. This massive disrespect to the emperor could seriously mess things up between the palace and the temple. The priests immediately dropped to their knees before Killian, banging their heads on the floor. They begged forgiveness for their behavior and pleaded for mercy. This time, the prince spared them, threatening to make them pay if it ever happened again. And the priests, overjoyed they weren't going to lose their heads, thanked him profusely. The temple's reaction was predictable, but Killian had bigger fish to fry than the temple. A servant came in and announced that Duke Salvatore was urgently requesting an audience. This was exactly what the prince was expecting, so he dismissed the priests before the meeting. As soon as they were gone, Sor strode into the hall with a determined look. First, he greeted His Highness as protocol demanded, but Killian didn't want to waste time and asked him to get straight to the point. Sor immediately stated he wasn't there to exchange pleasantries and demanded that His Highness immediately send troops into the sanctuary. Killian thought his request was ridiculous, since no one was allowed in during the ceremony. It's forbidden by imperial decree, but Sor insisted, explaining that Thisbe was in danger. The reason for all this is that heretics are targeting the shrine to destroy the home of the ancient gods. The leader of these heretics is planning to storm the shrine in the name of his god, Gigas, who isn't just some divine being, but a freaking huge serpent. Estelle was just about to head to the altar with Thisbe, but the priest was against it. But then he gets word about the order that this year, both holy women will light the fire. Estelle was stoked, and Thisbe realized that Killian had kept his word, and that news of her appearance at the shrine had already reached the nobles at court. The temple will also announce her presence to cover their own butts. Thisbe hoped everything would work out, since everyone involved had lived up to her expectations so far. And now she has a legit right to be at the shrine. After that, she gave Estelle an encouraging look, inviting her to move forward together. The priests just couldn't believe that the former and current saint were about to light the flame together. The girls approached the altar and together reached for the sacred chalice holding the fire. It felt like a ceremony, a passing of the torch. Thisbe's sure the perp's gonna strike when she's at her weakest. And that moment was right freaking now, as an energy bolt came flying their way. But it instantly became clear that Thisbe wasn't the target. It was Estelle. Thisbe barely had time to yell at her to duck and watch herself. She instinctively dropped the chalice and threw her hands up to shield her face. At the same time, she crouched down behind Thisbe, who managed to throw up a barrier. She had to use the scorpion's power for that, otherwise they would have been toast. And from the strength of that attack, the princess realized she'd caught the wrong kind of animal in her trap. This guy's paying the price for using forbidden power. Look at those beastly eyes. He controls the constellation of the Black Serpent, and only heretics are capable of that kind of thing. The priests started freaking out, scrambling to defend against the sudden attack. But before they could even get ready, they were grabbed. The criminals demanded everyone stay calm and announced that the sanctuary now belonged to them. And so nobody gets hurt. They got to drop their weapons and hand over the saint. Thisbe realized the heretics had infiltrated the temple disguised as priests. Then, using mana, She telepathically told Estelle that she was the heretic's target. She needs to get out of this sanctuary and join up with them. No ambushes on the way here, so Estelle should make it back okay too. Iller was still worried about Thisbe being left alone here, but she pointed out that the Saintess is responsible for her own safety, and she can't help her right now anyway. Thisbe noticed the heretics had weapons ready, but they weren't rushing to attack, so she told Estelle to take the chance to escape, sure they'd keep her alive no matter what. Iller looked around and remembered there were some small monsters nearby. And when Thisbe gives her the signal, she'll run and ask them for help. Meanwhile, the leader demanded again that they hand over the Saintess. Right then, Thisbe gave the signal, and Estelle took off like a shot. So, the princess decided to try summoning a constellation to take on the cult leader. Usually, she draws energy from the environment around her to do these summons. But this place has a crazy strong divine aura, and almost no mana. And the enemy standing in front of her is seriously powerful. Thisbe mentally apologized to Estelle, knowing she probably wasn't getting out of this. Meanwhile, Salvatore was racing towards the sanctuary on horseback. He had a deal with the cult leader, and Thisbe wasn't supposed to be directly harmed. But if anything happens to her, Sor would never forgive himself. He knows she'll hate him if she finds out the whole truth, and he'll never feel her warmth again. Suddenly, Estelle popped up in front of him, and Sor barely managed to stop his horse. The girl recognized him and Prince Killian, who was right behind. She was terrified and barely managed to tell them that Princess Thisbe was in danger. Estelle confessed that Thisbe stayed behind alone to hold off the heretics so she could escape. Now she needed help herself, and Sor yelled at the prince to step on it. Killian immediately ordered 2 squads to head to the sanctuary for the Duke. The warriors spurred their horses on at His Highness's command. But the prince found it weird that Sor knew about the heretic invasion first, something the sanctuary didn't even suspect, and he realized something was fishy. Just then, a letter arrived with instructions from the princess's shadow, and he knew what that meant. It was a letter from Thisbe's messenger, and Killian started reading it right away. His eyes went wide as saucers when he read that the heretic's goal was to destroy the sanctuary. They've planted explosives all along the mountain ridge, and the altar is the ultimate target. But that's not even the worst part. If the explosion triggers a collapse, they're all toast. The heretics know this perfectly well. That's why they set the charges at the very top. Killian immediately ordered several squads to find and disarm the explosives. He took the rest with him to show those heretics who's boss around here. He also sent a messenger to the temple, so reinforcements should be here soon. Still, time was running out. There's a ton of explosives and they're everywhere. All that's left is to try and minimize the damage and not get ourselves killed in the process. Meanwhile, Sor was getting closer and closer to the sanctuary. I was praying Thisbe could hold on a little longer, and she was going toe-to-toe with the heretic leader. His summoning power was insane, and her barrier was collapsing right before our eyes. He was standing there with this nasty grin, demanding she surrender to him. Now that she was standing there, totally defenseless, he was ready to strike. But then he noticed that this girl wasn't even trying to dodge. Thisbe was standing there cool as a cucumber, like the guy was full of it, and she called him out, saying his crummy little cult was too broke to afford the weapons. Weapons powerful enough to bust through the sanctuary, and they needed help to get it done. She figured out their benefactor made a deal that she was off limits to a direct attack. If the leader knew it would end like this, he never would have made that deal. Sor only wanted the current saint gone. He didn't care about anything else. But the saint dying was already part of the heretics' plan, and the Duke's just helping them get there. Plus, he's paying them handsomely, so it seemed like a sweet deal. Duke Salvatore had only one condition. One person had to be kept safe. That's Thisbe Louisa Calixt, and if anyone dares to lay a hand on her, then the soul of the Cybele cult priest belongs to Sor. Las, on his orders, gave the priest a contract written with dark magic to be signed in blood. It was full of complicated formulas that you can't just break. The priest wondered how a guy got his hands on an artifact like that, since dark magic's outlawed. But Salvatore was loyal to only one god, and this was more important to him than his own life. And now Cybele was pissed, not wanting some chick to screw up his plans. And since he couldn't just attack her, he decided to take her alive. Just then, Thisbe threw up another protective barrier around herself. Probably wouldn't hold for long, but she was hoping it would buy her some time. Besides, for the initial summoning, she needed to be completely cut off from the outside world. The girl focused, relying solely on her mana, and Sibel noticed the magical energy flows shifting and realized Fizby was trying to perform a ritual. But he was hoping she wouldn't pull it off, since she was still learning to control the power of the constellations. With one strike, he shattered her barrier again and demanded she come with him. But then he heard a voice from the other side, saying it wasn't over yet. Fizby even jokingly apologized if she messed anything up, since it was her first time. Then she demanded to know who put those heretics up to attacking the sanctuary. Meanwhile, Estelle was brought to the priest, who tended to the wounds on her legs. She had to run barefoot to avoid getting even more seriously hurt. Besides, she didn't have time to think about shoes then. All she could do was run. The girl felt helpless, because the heretics could have grabbed her. Estelle already knew the soldiers were looking for explosives, and she was desperate to help them. And she didn't care that her wounds hadn't healed yet and could get infected. Because if something happened to those people, her legs wouldn't matter anyway. She'd deal with the scars later, rather than come back with healthy legs and a heavy heart. Then, Estelle noticed the monster birds. The same ones that had helped her before. They flew right up to her, and it was obvious they were trying to tell her something. The priest next to her freaked out. But Estelle explained that these creatures were helping her. Unfortunately, they couldn't talk, and the saint could only understand their feelings. Taking a closer look, the girl realized the birds were asking her to follow them, and she decided to take their advice, because they wouldn't have come to her for no reason. Asking the priest to stay put, Estelle promised she'd be back soon. She headed after the feathered monsters into the deepest part of the forest, and came to a huge statue, locked in a seal, radiating unbelievable power. Estelle reached out to it, mentally begging it to awaken. Suddenly, everything around us started shaking like crazy, like a major earthquake hit. The statue's stone shell crumbled away, and a massive, glowing ember appeared. The creature was starving, and it only eats black stones. Some monsters eat rocks or fire, but this one eats coal, and Estelle's never seen anything like it. This thing could be a huge help, since it can eat all the explosives made from coal. That way, they can prevent the disaster. And Estelle says she knows where there are tons of black stones. Meanwhile, Fizby took on a different form, but she can only hold it for a few minutes. Tops. In that time, she's got to take out all the enemies, and she started aiming an arrow at them. Cybele, on the other hand, was sure she couldn't handle him, no matter what. But his confidence vanished instantly when Fizby's arrow pierced him with energy again and again. Nobody, not even in the sanctuary, could pull off something like this. His crew spotted the danger and immediately started throwing up a barrier over his head. But even that barrier won't hold for long. Fizby's arrows are pounding it hard. Cybele was trying to hang in there, knowing the princess would run out of mana soon. But then he got word that Imperial soldiers had already stormed the sanctuary. Any longer in their toast, and the cult leader needs to make a call, like yesterday. All that was left for him to do was order them to ditch the holy woman and bail from the sanctuary. And every cult member suddenly had a magical return stone in their hand. There were so many stones, the leader must have dropped a fortune on them. Realizing they were being bankrolled by some benefactor, Fizby declared it still wouldn't save them. But Cybele just sneered that he'd already armed all the bombs in the sanctuary, and told her to come with him if she didn't want to end up toast. The girl was frozen, and the summoning's power was fading fast too. Plus, that creepy energy from the black serpent was already reaching for her. But then Duke Salvator appeared in front of the cult leader and swung his sword. The priest's head went flying, and the soldiers took care of the rest of them. Soaked in blood, Sor noticed traces of magic and knew that Thisbe had dealt with the heretics. The Duke had a ton of questions for his bride-to-be right now, but there was no time. So he scooped her up in his arms and said they had to get out of there, ASAP. He knew the whole sanctuary was about to go sky high. Sor came for Thisbe even with all this danger, because he can't just leave her to her fate. Truth is, after all that, he's running on fumes and can only hope they make it out alive. But Thisbe knows one way, since everything around them is saturated with mana. She can create a massive magic barrier that'll shield the sanctuary from the blast. Then she'll have enough juice to save the others. But it'll cost her everything. Salvatore started begging Thisbe not to sacrifice herself, to get out of there. But the girl already knew that's exactly what he'd say. Then she snuggled even closer in his arms. But she wasn't sad. There was a faint smile on her face as she said goodbye to Sor. After that, a protective barrier started going up around them, and Thisbe grew weaker. Sor was begging her to stop, tears streaming down his face, but her mind was made up. Besides, in her condition, she wasn't going to get far anyway. That barrier she put up should protect the sanctuary from the blast. But Fizby was already so weak, she knew she was about to kick the bucket. Meanwhile, Estelle was showing the monster where the stuff was, and she was demanding he eat every last bit of it. The stuff was packed in barrels with timers and wrapped in magic seals, and the monster was swallowing each barrel like it was a freaking tic-tac. Then, when the time came and the timers went off, the barrels blew up inside him. A bright light instantly lit up the area where he was, and that beam shot straight into the sky. When everything went quiet, the monster let out a long, satisfied burp and patted his belly, like he'd just finished a Thanksgiving feast. He polished off the last bits right by the shrine, and Sor realized all that rumbling was just his stomach exploding. But then his attention snapped back to Fizby, who was barely breathing. Reinforcements arrived by this point, and Estelle was yelling for priests to help the princess. A bunch of priests immediately knelt around her and started healing her up. The heretics were all rounded up and taken into custody, and the captured priests were freed. But just to be safe, they double-checked everyone's IDs. Fizby started to come around, and the prince chewed her out for taking such a crazy risk. But if it weren't for her, the shrine would have been rubble, and who knows how many people would be dead. Killian knelt down beside her and thanked her on behalf of the entire empire. But at his last words, she closed her eyes again and casually rested her head on Sor's shoulder. The girl was exhausted, and she needs to wake up when her mana recovers. Her life's not in danger anymore, but the priest recommended she stay under observation for a couple weeks. Fizby was surprised that Sor stayed with her until the very end, even though he could have easily saved himself. And Killian promised he'd take care of Fizby while she recovers. Now the story's been changed, and 2 saints saved the sanctuary from the heretics. And now, when Princess Calixta opens her eyes, she'll be a hero to everyone. A little later, news started spreading about the prince's official announcement, about how heretics wanted to destroy the sanctuary, but the saints stopped them. The heroic deeds of Estelle and Fizby, who saved the shrine, were announced throughout the empire. And now everyone knows about Thisby's powers, so she's the empire's new hero. After that, people started questioning the interpretation of the divine prophecy, and the temple admitted that if a person meets the requirements, they could be the child of prophecy, which means in the blink of an eye, Thisby went from being a total pariah back to being a saint. But Estelle never believed Lady Calixt was a villain in the first place, so she was happy. Thisby, on the other hand, was bummed because her escape plan just went down the drain. She was annoyed that the whole empire knew about her abilities, and now she's a saint again on top of that. Estelle was a little shocked because she's no longer suspected of, misdeeds, and people are treating her with respect. So now she has no reason to run. But Thisby didn't believe she was being taken seriously. First, she was a saint, and then they thought she was a monster. She felt like she hadn't changed a bit, and she was just losing herself here. Suddenly, Estelle wondered if Thisby would try to bolt again. What if something like this happens wherever she's planning to go? She also confessed that she's only considered a saint here. Back home, they called her something else. They called her, let's just say they thought she was a little too close to the local wildlife, and everyone kept their distance. That's why Estelle moved to the capital, hoping her life would get better. But once she got here, she realized she only felt happy when she looked at her hometown, or when she was running through the woods, crunching through the fallen leaves, and when she was hanging out with the critters, who were actually pretty cool with her. Estelle feels like she's really missing all of that, but she knew she had to leave the past behind and not look back. And when she asked again if Thisby was ready to leave this place, she realized she couldn't. And not just because things are starting to look up. Sor Salvator is here, because no matter where she went, she wouldn't be able to just forget him. She feels happy with him and misses him when he's not around. And when they're together, she wants that moment to last forever. And then it hit Thisby. She'd been genuinely in love with Sor all this time. At that moment, even her expression changed so much that Estelle flinched. But Thisby immediately calmed her down, assuring her that she wasn't going anywhere. Meanwhile, Mahalon figured out that Sor's route matches the victim's movements. Now it all clicks why that guy knew about the party shenanigans before anyone else. The guild leader can barely wrap his head around the fact that Duke Salvator's behind all this. The dude who's making his pal Thisby feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Before long, the whole town's buzzing about how the princess is the pride of the Calixt clan. The girl overheard it herself whenever she stepped outside. And this morning, a whole mob was banging on their door, just to pay their respects. Thisbe, though, is having a hard time adjusting to suddenly being the big hero. She came to after 3 days, but magic's still a real struggle to control, 'cause she's got some serious internal damage going on. And until she's fully recovered, she's got to ditch the magic and forget about bailing to Says. Things seem to be getting better, but something still felt off. The day she finally went outside after the holiday, Sor messaged her. He heard she was feeling better and sent her a few sweet lines. He also said he was dying to see her and that he'd be waiting for her at their usual cafe. After a while, Thisbe felt even better. She even had a blush on her cheeks. Her grandpa was super happy that she was feeling healthier. She was grateful for Estelle's company, which kept her from feeling so alone. Usually, her personal maid took care of her health. But after they found out that Maid was trying to do her in, the Duke forbade the servants from getting close. Only Emily, who didn't know anything about what happened, still hung out with her sometimes. So, the girl noticed a bunch of new servants around the house, and the old man confessed he lifted the no-approach order. He fired all the old staff and hired people he trusts way more, guys who've been vetted. So, Thisbe doesn't have to worry about anything like that happening again, period. Alma's also admitted he toughened her up through her upbringing, so no one would dare push her around. And when she finally decides to leave, all he can do is accept her choice. The girl still didn't get why he was doing all this, knowing what she was planning. He just realized her decision was well thought out, and she's ready to leave home. But also, he wants her to know that no matter where she goes, she can always come back. Those words really hit Thisbe hard, and she quietly thanked him. And the Duke apologized for waking up so late, and now he's trying to make up for lost time. Turns out, while she was out cold, Grandpa worked things out with the temple. He didn't just get them to reinterpret the prophecy in her favor, but he also demoted Count Nover and everyone else who wanted Thisbe banished. Plus, he greased the palms of some reporters, so the press would only write glowing articles about her. Thisbe was grateful, because without his help, she wouldn't have been able to win people back. The Duke decided not to keep his granddaughter any longer, figuring she was heading out on a date with her fiancé. But when she explained that she wasn't in a rush, Alma suggested they have some tea. Thisbe happily accepted, because she was actually craving something sweet. But what made her even happier was that her grandpa was actually starting to change. From then on, the papers were full of stories about how Thisbe, the heroine, had saved the Empire from certain threats. While plowing through one of those articles, Sor finally got the call that she was coming to meet him. But while she was out cold, he personally led the crackdown on what was left of the cult. Estelle told the girl all about it, and she definitely wasn't sugarcoating anything. Seeing her fiancé, Thisbe noticed he'd lost a ton of weight, and his blue eyes, just filled with sadness and longing, really stood out against his pale face. Thisbe didn't waste any time. She just ran into his arms and told him how much she missed him. But Sor suddenly got super flustered. He couldn't believe his bride-to-be had said something like that. It was actually the first time she'd admitted to missing him. Before this, she always kept her distance. But things were different now, and she promised to tell him stuff like that more often. Later, over tea, Thisbe mentioned that something felt off to her. It's the middle of the day, the streets should be packed, but it's practically deserted. Turns out, Sor rented out the entire street just for them, all day long. The girl thought that was so romantic. She instantly broke into a smile. She just wondered why a whole street and not a cafe. And Sor admitted he didn't want anyone bothering them. After all, she's a hero now, and the second she shows her face outside, she'll have a mob of fanatics chasing her. And the Duke wanted her first outing after the celebration to be special. Plus, the nobles helped him make it happen. But not for free, he had to foot the bill himself. Sor didn't want to keep anything from Thisbe anymore, and he was ready to face the music. That's why he wanted today to be perfect, thinking it might be their last time together. Leaning in, the Duke kissed her hand and asked if he could be her escort for the evening. They stepped outside, and musicians struck up a sweet tune. It was the very serenade that Thisbe had once sung for Sora. The Duke wanted her to have a great time. He even arranged for some shops to stay open late. And as they strolled past a flower stall, the vendor offered her a beautiful rose. She loved the bloom and immediately inhaled its fragrance. It had been so long since she'd received compliments and been treated with such respect. She'd really missed it. Thisbe really wanted today to go well. Turning to the Duke, she thanked him for the lovely outing. He still couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth and vanish from her life. So, he figured he'd confess everything over dinner and invited her right then and there. But then Thisbe dropped a bomb. She said she had something to tell him over dinner, too. Truth was, the girl had finally decided to give him her answer today. But both of them were just dying to know what the other one wanted to say. Then the Duke pulled out 2 theater tickets, just for the 2 of them. The play was called Madame Delaunay's Secret Night, and Thisbe thought that was a little weird. That play's notorious for its spicy scenes, and Sor even felt a little awkward remembering that. But he was hoping it would make Thisbe see him in a bad light, because then she'd lose interest in him, and her heart wouldn't get broken. Just in case, Sor suggested a different play, but she was still down for the original. She was actually curious to see it. Before, she only knew the book with that title. Thisbe had wanted to read it for ages, but this is even better. She even thought it was kind of funny that her fiancé had such unique taste. He went totally red, feeling awkward, and didn't even know what to say. But he was bummed that his plan to push Thisbe away had backfired. Still, he had a few more tricks up his sleeve, but for now they headed into the theater. Thisbe watched the actors on stage with wide-eyed wonder. Plus, she was enjoying spending so much time with Salvatore. What's more, it was just the 2 of them, and the girl decided to let herself go a little. Picking her moment, she touched his hand. After all, they were engaged. But for some reason, Sor flinched and pulled his hand away. Thinking she wanted to say something, he told her to wait until the play was over. Thisbe felt awkward, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. And Salvatore even turned away a little, but you could still see his cheeks burning up. The girl couldn't figure out why he was so embarrassed. But then she noticed the performance on stage was getting pretty intense. Then her thoughts went back to Sor, who she just wanted to hold hands with. But she just doesn't know that the Duke has decided to keep his distance from her. He himself wanted to hold her hand at that moment too, and those thoughts were eating him up inside. However, they sat through the rest of the play without saying another word. Later, at the cafe, Thisbe was raving about the amazing acting, the sets, and the lighting, even though she barely remembered anything from the second act. Sor himself missed all the good parts, too busy trying to keep his distance from her. But he told her he thought the play was intense, and Thisbe understood why he was blushing so hard. Suddenly, the girl got a really familiar feeling. She'd been getting the sense for a while now that someone was watching her from the bushes. So, to check it out, Thisbe said she needed to take a little walk, because she'd eaten too much and needed some fresh air. Salvatore didn't argue, and she strolled off, casually glancing in that direction. She also noticed Sor was acting weird today. Usually, he insists on tagging along, but she had a different goal now, and stepping back, she called out for whoever was hiding to come out. And Mahalan came out to her, confident that she'd spotted him. He was just curious about the exact moment she realized it was him. Back when the play ended, when the lights went out, she'd noticed a weird shadow, and she started asking him why he was secretly following her. Mahalan confessed that he'd found the one behind all the murders and the attack on the shrine. Then, after a short pause, he named Sora Salvatore. The fact that Thisbe's fiancé was the mastermind hit her like a ton of bricks. The girl felt a huge wave of disappointment and hoped it was a mistake. Mahalan explained that he started gathering information on the Duke after that dinner. Dude had some serious security, but for the guild leader, it was no biggie. He couldn't just call Sor the bad guy right away, not with Thisbe trusting him and his airtight alibi. Plus, Salvatore was always right there with her whenever the perp showed up. But the fact that his right-hand man is the real killer, that changes everything. The criminal and that bodyguard, they had the same scars. Even so, Mahalan decided to dig up even more dirt. In Sor's office, he found a locked box, the kind where you keep your valuables. Popping the lock and taking a peek was a piece of cake for him. He saw some envelopes in a ring box, and he felt kinda awkward, so he shut the box. But as he closed it, he noticed the box was way too small to fit inside the space. After a quick check, Mahalan realized there was a false bottom. Digging deeper, he found an artifact soaked in dark magic. It was a contract written in an ancient language, but one line in particular caught Mahalan's eye. It said the priest's soul would be the price if Thisbe's life was ever in danger. The next moment, the door burst open, and 2 soldiers rushed into the office. But the room was empty, except for a draft blowing through the open window. The soldiers were a little confused, because they were sure they'd heard something, but they figured it was just the wind rattling the open shutters. Mahalan, worried sick, hid behind a tree and planned to tell Fizbe about this ASAP. Now she understood why the heretics hadn't attacked her, and why the cult leader gave Sor a weird look. This all proves Sor Salvador is a real piece of work. What's worse, he knew about those heretics before Zodiac did. The girl was totally floored. She couldn't believe it was her fiancé. For a second, everything went black, and she almost hit the deck. Mahalan caught her just in time, and after saying she was okay, she decided to talk to Sor herself. The guild leader thought that was a dumb idea, since the guy's been lying all along. And you can't trust a word he says now, not after he torched Fizbe's trust. Mahalan was worried Princess Calixte might get hurt somehow, but she just thanked him for showing her the truth. Even if Sor's guilty, she wants to hear his side of the story, to get the truth straight from him, because that's the only way she'll ever get out of this dump. Thisbe's made up her mind to leave, and told Mahal to pack her bags. After a letdown like that, there's nothing keeping her here anymore. Going back to Sor, she reminded him he wanted to talk to her, and now she wants to hear it herself, even though she's pretty sure what's coming. Salvatore was a little nervous. The evening came way too fast, but he still pulled out the document and confessed that he wanted to ask Thisbe to call off their engagement. That wasn't exactly what she was expecting, but she said she already knew the reason. She knows that Sor's the one who's really to blame for everything that's happened. You could see the disappointment all over Thisbe's face, but she's curious how long he thought he could keep playing her. She demanded to know why he did it and what the hell he was planning. Sor just wanted to bring back that saintly smile he once saw, the one that's now fading from this world. And he knows damn well that Fizbeth would have judged him if she'd stayed with him. He also confessed that from the very first moment he saw her, he hated her guts. Yet, he offed everyone who openly fought against her, even made a deal with heretics to take her out. That was the whole truth. And he knew Fizbeth would now hate him forever. The girl blew up and shoved him, knocking the box with the cursed ring out of his hand. She lost her balance and fell with him, screaming that he better not lie to her again. Now she doubted that his happiness when he first saw her was even real, because she'd seen both sides of his coin, and his true nature, not hesitating to get his hands dirty. This kind of love seemed really weird to her, but Phoebe felt like he was holding back something. Her tears of disappointment dripped onto Sor's face, but he couldn't tell her anything more. Just then, soldiers showed up and announced the Duke was under arrest for rebelling against the church. Phoebe begged them not to take him away, because she still had questions. But then the prince told her to stop, or they'd think she was in on it too. And he also announced that both Sor and she were now in for a serious talking to. Arriving at the palace, Phoebe remembered how they used to play here all the time, hiding from the grown-ups. That was a long time ago, but they weren't here now for some trip down memory lane. Phoebe was wondering how the imperial court figured out so fast that Sor was the one responsible. The prince explained that before the treaty was signed, the cult leader ordered one of his followers to keep an eye on things. And that occultist, he noticed Duke Salvatore. After his testimony, they searched the Duke's house and found this contract. It was sealed with dark magic, but the main thing is, according to the contract, the priest can't harm Fizbe. What the prince said matched what Mahalan told the princess, and the anxiety from realizing that Sor was actually guilty just overwhelmed her even more. Killian went on to say that the princess doesn't really know this guy at all, and she trusts him because he's a master at putting on an act. Fizbe still didn't agree, sure that she knew Sor better than the prince did, especially since it's really tough to trust absolutely no one around you. She even knows that while she was asleep, Sor rounded up the remaining occultists, but Killian clarified that things weren't exactly as they seemed. Those people were completely messed up, like they couldn't even speak. The prince described Sora as a brutal killer, someone you just can't trust. And this guy's gonna pay the ultimate price for treason tomorrow. Killian's gonna be there himself when they read the sentence. Leaning in close to Fizbe, trying to smooth her hair, the prince asked her to end her suffering and to finally make the right call. But she didn't get why he didn't just tell her to break off the engagement and stay away from Sora. Killian wanted to be smooth about it, but clearly that backfired. He's lost on why she's hesitating, but then he joked that she's fallen for the Duke. But the girl was dead serious, said that's exactly how it was. Then she got all flustered and said she wasn't sure what she really felt. Later, Killian got a secret visitor, someone curious why he lied to the princess. After all, the cult leader hadn't ordered anyone to monitor the situation. The prince said that because Sor was good at hiding, and the investigation hit a dead end. But he managed to find the villain thanks to Maheon's shadow, who was now his guest. And if the prince admitted that the shadow helped him catch the Duke, Princess Callisto would be super bummed out. These two just agreed that Sor needed to be taken care of, for Phoebe's sake. Thanks to Mahaon, the prince was able to prove the Duke's guilt, which he's super grateful for. The guild leader only agreed to help him to protect Thisbe. The trial opened the very next day. Sor stood before the judge, with Killian watching the proceedings from a balcony behind him. Angry comments started rising from the crowd in the courtroom. Everyone wanted the Duke dead for conspiring with heretics, and they read the charges against him, attacking the sanctuary and a series of murders. But Sor didn't care about that. All that mattered was that Thisbe was once again the Empire's saint. Even if someone shows up who's jealous of her, she now has enough power to stand up for herself. He was only sorry that the last time he saw her, she was so upset. And standing there before the judge, Sor didn't deny the charges against him. Out of nowhere, the courtroom doors swung wide open. It was Thisbe, and she announced, loud and clear, that she was here to defend the Duke. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. The princess was taking the side of a criminal? Killian demanded his servant explain how the princess even got in here. Salvatore started demanding Lady Calix's leave, but she wasn't backing down. See, according to imperial law, if the defendant doesn't have a lawyer, a close relation can step in to defend them. Thisbe came here as his fiancé and has every right to defend him. The prince was furious that she showed up. This just made everything harder. But what really stung was that she wanted to defend the guy who did this. But Thisbe wasn't about to let him go down without a fight. She wants him to beg for forgiveness, to live, and to make up for what he's done. And she's hoping Sor Salvatore will grant her request. The night before, Duke Calasct noticed his granddaughter staying up late in the library. The girl was studying imperial law to prepare for tomorrow's trial. But Almasa was more worried that she was going to defend Sor, who had betrayed the church. And he started begging her to just break off the engagement with the guy. But Thisbe wouldn't agree, because when rumors started about her, Sor was always on her side. And she wasn't arguing that he was guilty of all those things. But she's sure Sor was trying to help her. He just chose the wrong way to do it. Obviously, not thinking the princess would end up in a situation like this. Besides, this wasn't just some lovesick puppy acting out. That's why Thisbe wants to give him a chance to face up to what he's done. She wants to hear him confess, face to face, when they're alone. Plus, she's seriously ticked off at Sora, and she'll regret it if he kicks the bucket before she tells him what she really thinks. Alma suddenly got thoughtful, then said, "There's no way to get Sora off the hook completely, but they could shorten his sentence if they prove he wasn't trying to destroy the sanctuary. They could spin it so the heretics were the ones who wanted it gone." Almas didn't suddenly love Salvatore, but he was a comfort to Thisbe when she was all alone. Back then, he put a stop to everything except her meetings with the young Duke. Thisbe suddenly remembered herself and gave her grandpa a grateful hug. She was stoked he was on her side, but he told her to get back to business, and the girl admitted she had an idea now, even though she thought she was totally stuck just a minute ago. So, Duke Callisto stayed with his granddaughter that evening, helping her figure things out. On the day of the trial, everyone was sure Salvatore was toast, but the defense claimed the attack on the sanctuary was solely the work of some extremists. As proof, Princess Callisto pointed to a certain document, the very contract that was found at Duke Salvatore's place. Killian was surprised, because the document only seemed to prove Sor's guilt. Still, the judge granted the defense's request and asked for the document to be brought forward. Since the princess requested the trial be reopened, they decided to re-examine the evidence. The girl thanked the judge and read a section from the contract. First, she pointed out the clause stating that no one can try to take her life. But this contract also says that the hit was ordered on Saint Estelle. The prince just smirked, because that only makes the Duke's guilt worse. Estelle, who was in the hall, was scared that Thisbe would now be accused of protecting a traitor, and she worried that this made it even harder for the princess to get out of this mess. But the princess continued, saying that the contract never mentions attacking the sanctuary. Therefore, the contract proves the attack was solely organized by heretics. The prince was shocked, realizing the princess was trying to exonerate Sor, and he flew into a rage, understanding she'd planned to save him from execution all along. And Thisbe just demanded the prince prove that Sor ordered the attack on the shrine. He didn't have that kind of proof, and he barely had any time to gather intel. But what bugged him more was how Thisbe figured all this out in a single night. Truth is, she got help from the Zodiac Info Guild. It was that evening, when she was thinking about skipping town again. She asked Mahalan to hold up a sec, because she wasn't fully recovered yet. Plus, she had something else she needed to take care of before she left. She knew the Imperial Court would try to squeeze info out of the heretics. Then Sor's crimes would be exposed, so she asked Mahalan to go to the prince and spill everything. The guild leader was pissed, because that would bring the Imperial Guard down on them instantly. That's exactly what Thisbe planned. Mahal stole the documents to use in court. Not long ago, Killian claimed Thisbe trusted people too much, but she didn't trust them because Warward was the one who got cocky. Now, in the courtroom, Killian was furious that things hadn't gone his way, and the judge reminded him it was time to deliver the verdict. Killian had to admit the sanctuary terror plot was the heretics' idea. Considering the defendant actively helped catch the terrorists, the court sentences Duke Salvatore to 10 years in exile. That was the final verdict, and Killian wasn't about to overturn it. After the trial, Thisbe still wanted to know why Sora was being sent to Caldale specifically, and he explained that before becoming a knight, Salvatore had fought in a ton of battles in that region, so he'd be in a familiar environment there, even though that's a territory that hasn't seen peace in 1,000 years, which pretty much meant Sora had a snowball's chance in hell of coming back. But either way, it'd be better than just getting executed right away. At least Salvatore would get to die fighting for his country. Thisbe still didn't like the decision, and she made the prince an offer. Soon, the Duke started getting ready to leave and decided to take that ring with him, the one his assistant found and returned, even though he begged his lord not to. It pained him to see the Duke in such a state, but Sor knew there was nothing he could do, and it was time for him to hit the road. They call the Caldale region a century-old conflict zone, and that's where he spent his youth. After his mother passed, he had no right to inherit, so he had to become a knight, because that's how he could get a title straight from the emperor himself. He needed to hurry, so the Salvatore family wouldn't fall under the elders' control, and Sor decided to protect his family, just like his mother wanted. The young duke was sent to Caldale, where he aimed to make a name for himself. He spent a whole year there, taking out enemies and turning the snowy plains crimson. Whenever he started to get sick of it, he'd remember the brightest moment, the day he first saw the saint, who he dreamed of meeting again, even just once. But he knew if he showed up looking like this, she'd freak. So, he cleaned himself up and hid his wounds under his clothes. He also planned to bring the princess all the things she loved, believing that the saint would definitely smile again on the day they met. And when that long-awaited day finally arrived, the Duke was a little on edge. But he told Thisbe that his mind was just preoccupied with a bunch of stuff. That day, the princess also got the order stripping her of her saint status. Another girl was appointed in her place, but Thisbe wasn't too bummed out about it. However, she wasn't the same cheerful girl Sor had remembered. Now he was back at the place of his childhood, noticing that nothing had changed. But even he knew it wouldn't be easy to change things around here. Either way, the most important thing to him was seeing Phoebe smile again. The Duke couldn't just stand by and watch. He had to win her back somehow, because he was too greedy, and everything he'd built had come crashing down. Sor glanced down again at the ring, the owner of which, according to legend, is doomed to a tragic end. And now he saw the whole situation as a curse brought on by that thing. But he'd be happy if Phoebe was happy, even if it meant he never saw her again. Soon, he and Lars pulled up to the snowy gates of the estate that would now be their home. They were also accompanied by a number of servants and soldiers, and Salvatore told them to hurry up and for everyone to stay sharp. It broke his heart to leave Thisbe, but he didn't want to hold her back. Then, out of nowhere, they spotted that girl in the fur wrap standing right in front of the gates. Salvatore was completely stunned, not understanding how the princess got there. He even thought he was seeing things, like Thisbe's ghost was calling him to the afterlife. But Thisbe was really there, of her own free will. She'd told the prince about her escape plan when they spoke after the trial. She knew that, after everything, they'd try to strip her of her title again to protect the church's authority. Even for the prince, going up against the Pope to defend her would be a tough fight. So, in exchange for giving up her escape, Thisbe asked to be appointed warden of Caldale. And now, standing in front of Sor, The girl explained that she would be watching him. He better not even think about dying or running off before I say so. Besides, we still have a lot to talk about, and Phoebe asked to stay here. Before she left for Caldale, Grandpa tried to talk her out of it. He didn't want her going to such a dangerous place. But Phoebe had already settled things with the Emperor himself. Plus, this is a perfect chance to have a chat with Duke Salvatore. Seeing he couldn't change his granddaughter's mind, Duke Asmus didn't argue anymore. He just told her to remember that no matter where she was, she'd always be the pride of House Calixt. He also told her not to let anyone walk all over her and to stand tall. He bought her a bunch of warm clothes for the trip because Caldale has a brutal climate. The old man was still worried about his granddaughter going to a place like that to find a husband. Thisbe was happy that her grandpa had started showing his feelings more lately. It was like he was trying to make up for lost time, even though his worries sounded more like complaints. But they were closer now, and the princess promised to write often. Then she left the house she was just starting to get used to and headed to Caldale. When she met Sor, he immediately started demanding she leave, but he couldn't even look her in the eye while he was saying it. Anyway, Thisbe ended up being shown into the house and given a spacious room. It was a little chilly in there, since her visit was so unexpected. But what bothered her more was that Sor took off straight to the front lines as soon as she arrived, and now he won't be back for at least another week. Thisbe realized that Sor was avoiding her by heading straight to the battlefield, but she believed she'd get another chance to talk to him, especially since she was here as an overseer. So, to kill some time, the girl asked for a tour of the area. Sir Lass, who didn't go with the Duke, immediately agreed. Sor asked him to stay behind and look after Lady Calixt. He also hoped that Thisbe would see how dangerous things were and go back home. So Lass's secret mission was to convince the princess of exactly that. Right now, he explained that his presence was necessary because she hadn't fully recovered from her injuries. But Thisbe suddenly declared that Lass was also involved in whatever was going on, since Sor had an alibi. She suspected something was up because too much didn't add up. And she thought she knew Sor well enough to believe he wasn't capable of this kind of crap. Thisbe realized Salvatore was now feeling guilty about what he'd done. But using death to get ahead? That's some cold-blooded military-grade stuff right there. And she hopes Sor genuinely regrets what he's done. Later, she saw just how messed up the situation in Caldale really was. They're short on food here, and the people are worn down by the endless waves. And the damage is piling up faster than the snow can cover it. Lass was worried the noblewoman had to witness something like this, basically hinting it was high time for her to head back home. But Thisbe figured it was just a setup, an intentional trick, and Sor was behind it. Still, she was going to talk to the Duke, because that's the real reason she came here. And ending the war? That's Saint Estelle's mission. Seeing all this just made Thisbe even more determined to stick by her fiancé. After a while, the Duke came back, and there were a ton of wounded. He ordered them to be taken care of as soon as he walked in. But then he heard Thisbe's voice. Sor was surprised this girl was still around and had come out to meet him. He was even pissed that she had to see him like this, covered in stuff. Salvatore abruptly turned away, covering his face with his hand, and straight up told her to go back. But Thisbe confessed she was ready for this, and she's only here to see him. This is the perfect time to finally end things between them. Sor agreed to talk and handed her the engagement annulment papers again. He asked her to sign, reminding her how he'd covered up his actions, and that being with a cheater would only ruin her reputation more. Sor knows he messed up, and he really wants to make things right. But Thisbe said he was going about it all wrong, trying to shift the blame. Besides, she doesn't think his kindness and care were all lies. Not even now, when he's trying to break off the engagement for her own good. Things between them have gone way beyond just chatting in a coffee shop, so Thisbe decided she's not ready to end their relationship. And ripping the document in half, she declared she wouldn't break off the engagement. The Duke was completely floored, but the girl was dead certain about her decision. Sor realized that Thisbe wasn't going to change her mind anytime soon, so he decided to compromise, offering a trial period. Since the request came from him, Salvatore was willing to give her the time. He's sure that once she fully understands the situation here, Thisbe, being reasonable, will leave before her reputation is completely trashed. Sor heard rumors that she plans to stick around here for a whole year, so he decided to give her a trial run for that entire period. The girl agreed, but she had one condition. If Sor changes his mind during that time, The annulment request will be considered invalid. Salvatore agreed, but Thisbe's sure he'll change his mind way before a month is up. But 2 weeks later, she started thinking she really might lose him. The whole time, she kept in touch with Mahalan, and he told her not to give up. Plus, he knew it was hard for her to get used to living so far from home. He also believed that the Duke she loved so much wouldn't last much longer either. Thisbe initially thought so too, but Soar is way too cold with her. One night, she went to his room late, asking if he wanted to grab a bite. He would have always said yes before. He might have even cranked up the heat in the room. But now, when she asked to come in, he said there were too many prying eyes in the castle. Soar didn't want any rumors getting around, and he demanded that Thisbe stop coming to see him so late. In that moment, she thought Soar was really going to call off their engagement. He confirmed that he'd made his decision when he handed over the annulment papers. The girl told herself that his coldness was just an attempt to shield her from criticism, but she still had to know if he meant those words he said about, well, really disliking her. Soar couldn't believe she remembered what he'd blurted out back then. And Thisbe just reminded him about the terms of their trial period, that if he changed his mind, the request to break off the engagement would be null and void. The Duke hoped he could make it through the year, so Thisbe would go back home and be a saint again. He knew his feelings for her would only get in the way. So, he just apologized and told her to go back to her room. That look on his face was new to Thisbe, and it made her question how he felt. But Mahal, hearing about it, even said those two were kinda alike. Thisbe was thinking about leaving the country too, back when everyone thought she was against the Empire. That's what they have in common. They're both willing to go to the mat for each other. Still, the princess wasn't about to back down. She wouldn't have even started if she was going to. She wasn't falling for such an obvious trick to send her home. She became a supervisor to stay close to Soar, who decided to call off the engagement. She decided to dig in her heels here and see Soar by discussing local matters. Besides, she can't just sit back knowing the state this place is in. Right now, the biggest problem here is getting enough food. The harsh climate makes farming impossible. That's why she decided to ask someone for help. Thisbe went to see Roderick, a merchant who wasn't doing so hot. The guy was surprised to see such a respected figure and wondered what he owed the pleasure of her personal visit to his humble abode. This guy was Estelle's ally in the novel. Before she helped him out, he ran a tiny shop in a village near Caldale. He started with deliveries, and now he might be the key to solving this problem. So, Thisbe heard he was looking for an investor and offered herself up. She already knew he wanted to build a transportation network that covered the whole empire. Up until now, every merchant had to handle their own deliveries. But Roderick's unified system would seriously cut down on transport times. Problem was, he couldn't find any backers because the concept was too out there. So Roderick was stoked that she got his idea and agreed to be his sponsor. His reaction seemed almost too enthusiastic, if you ask me. Anyway, she had one condition, but the guy was down for anything. And Thisbe asked that Caldale be the starting point for his project. The dude's thinking, if that's the deal, I can't take Thisbe's backing. 'Cause starting a business in this middle-of-nowhere dump is a total non-starter. Even if you tried, you'd be signing your own bankruptcy papers. Hell, Caldale's been a war zone for over 1,000 years. That means constant need for military supplies. Plus the weather here sucks. What's worse, even the military might jack your supply convoys. That's why Roderick isn't willing to risk people's lives. But Thisbe told him to hold his horses, saying the problem could be fixed. She even promised him she'd personally take care of straightening things out. Thisbe sounded super confident, but deep down, she knew how messed up things really were. I mean, the wars in Caldale have literally been going on for centuries. Stopping this thing is damn near impossible, so we gotta find another way out. It was a cakewalk in the original story, but this plot twist just threw a wrench in everything. And to top it off, 'cause of her injury, Yasby can't summon or use portals. After getting Mahalan on our side, I thought everything would be smooth sailing from here on out. But things are way messier than we thought. Then, after racking her brain for a while, Thisbe had an idea. She heard about this artifact that could solve our transportation problems. Easy. It's a teleportation stone that lets you magically link two doors together. That'll make getting between places a whole lot easier. And if we pitch it right, Roderick's definitely gonna bite. The next day, Thisbe set out to find that stone, come rain or shine. Nights went with her, and Lass kept saying she shouldn't be pushing herself so hard, especially 'cause ahead are lands crawling with monsters. super dangerous. The cold was making her hands numb, but she wasn't about to turn back. She was going to find that stone no matter what it took. And after a tough trek, she finally spotted the stone she was after. After a while longer, Fizby crafted a few magical artifacts from it. They looked kinda like toys, but not bad for a first try. This thing's gonna unlock some new trade routes now. Lass just stared at the trinket, amazed at how the princess could sense magic. Fizby couldn't promise it'd work though, since it was her first time doing something like this. She also wished she could link her room to Sora's. If things were different between them, they could hang out and cuddle all the time. But right now, he's not that guy. He's just a cold creature to her. Lass suggested the princess try out the item right away. It was a great idea, and Lady Calixt happily agreed. They grabbed Roderick for the test and headed to a deserted street. Fizby admitted she hadn't tested the artifact yet, but if it worked, it should let them teleport 3 times a day. Plus, there are distance limits, and you can't teleport outside the border. And if everything goes according to plan, Roderick's business will be a guaranteed hit. The merchant reached for the door handle, the one leading to the magic portal. Meanwhile, Thisbe was praying that everything would work out. And when the door swung open, everyone gasped in amazement, especially Roderick. Beyond the door was truly another world, and the merchant started singing the princess's praises. She not only won him over, but also solved the food shortage problem. News of this spread pretty quickly, eventually reaching Duke Salvatore. After a while, they met up to talk things over. The girl showed up eagerly, but he seemed kind of troubled. After the artifact test, Salvatore was invited to come take a look. The smug merchant immediately started thanking the Duke for such an opportunity, but Sor didn't take credit and told him to thank Princess Thisbe instead. He figured that after seeing the horrors of war, she'd get spooked and run. But Thisbe didn't just bail. She actually decided to tackle the problem head-on, and the age-old chill of Kaldil began to recede thanks to one person. Sor wasn't even sure if anyone could shine brighter than her. Later, he came to talk to the princess about the celebration in her honor. He was supposed to express his gratitude, but he said the problems were probably unfixable. Even so, the girl was thrilled, because Sor was doing it for her. Salvatore expected that kind of reaction, of course, but expressing gratitude was his duty. Meanwhile, Thisbe was totally lost in her fantasy about Sor finally opening up to her. Her heart started pounding like crazy, and she immediately started thinking about which dress to wear. Soon after, a festival was held in Kaldale. The previous food supply problems vanished with the appearance of the magic artifact. A huge feast was thrown for the occasion, and Thisbe received tons of thanks. From talking with the townspeople, the princess also learned something new. They told her about Sor's usual behavior, which she hadn't noticed behind his constant smile. Apparently, he was cold and super strict with everyone else. Thisbe realized that he never looked at her the way he looked at those people. But she's sure that he was really himself with her, the Duke was. Now she started paying closer attention to how he acted around other people. But she didn't see the sad look in his eyes when he turned away from her. Soon, Thisbe realized she'd had a little too much to drink. She got so caught up in everything, she didn't even notice the dancing starting. Plus, she lost track of Salvatore and decided to go find him. After all, she was really hoping to get a dance with him tonight. What really bugged her was that they still hadn't really talked, so she went off to find him, not wanting to leave things the way they were. Soru himself felt weird being alone when the party was in full swing, but there was nothing he could do. He needed to get away from Thisbe, because when he glanced at her again, he caught her eye. Again. For a second, he thought she was going to wave, like, say, hi or something, but he quickly looked away, trying to act like he didn't even see her. Salvatore thought he could handle all this, but he realized he was dead wrong. He felt that urge, again, that need to get close to the princess, but he was scared that giving in to that urge could be the end of him. So, he decided he wouldn't get within a mile of Thisbe today, because he'd lose it, especially with all the booze he'd had. And while he was thinking all this, Thisbe spotted him and called out to him. He wanted to bolt, but he noticed the princess didn't look so good. She barely made it to him before she started fading, and he caught her in his arms. He carried her to her room and laid her on the bed. And all that time, Thisbe kept repeating his name in a daze. And just as her head touched the soft pillow, without even opening her eyes, she asked Salvatore to dance with her. Sor just stood there, not knowing what the heck he was supposed to do. For a while, Thisbe mumbled her request to dance, a little incoherently. For a moment, Salvatore gave in to his feelings, and he wanted to respond to her with tenderness. He even leaned in a little, wanting to wake the sleeping princess with a kiss, but he immediately pulled back, realizing he couldn't do that to someone who was asleep. Just then, the voices of the knights could be heard from outside the door. Las was calling the shots, telling the knights where to search, and Sor realized they were being hunted. He decided to cut out any potential misunderstandings and planned to have a chat with Las. But just as he took a few steps toward the door, Thisbe called out to him again. She woke up and in a languid voice begged him not to leave, even trying to take his hand. Sor saw her gaze, sincere and full of desperation and hope. Something inside him twinged at that moment, and it showed on his face. The next morning, Thisbe remembered calling Sor's name a few times before blacking out. Then a maid came to her, bringing water for her to wash with. Emily was worried if her mistress was all right, and she assured her that everything was fine. But then the girl heard a commotion outside and asked what was going on. And when the maid confessed she had a message for Thisbe, she got worried. There was a crowd of people gathering little by little outside the windows. Turns out, word of the lavish banquet had reached even the common soldiers. Hungry and beat, they decided to join Khalil. And with most of the local knights off at war, Sor needs people to protect the land. But he suspected there might be a spy hiding among the new recruits. And he didn't know how to weed out the ones who were actually on the level. Seeing Salvatore's worry, Thisbe offered to handle the problem. She used the power of the Libra constellation to tell truth from lies. And Sor started calling the soldiers up one by one to ask them why they wanted to join Kaldale. The method was simple. Make people talk in front of these scales. The energy of their words flows, so liars fall onto one side and truth-tellers on the other. That's how Salvatore could figure out who to welcome in and who to reject. And Thisbe was happy that her powers had recovered a bit, so she could come help out. During the selection process, the girl stood next to the Duke in the hall, even though he thought it was still too early for her to handle so many people. By evening, Thisbe felt drained, having had to vet over 100 people. She'd already changed and was getting ready to drift off to sleep when there was a knock at the door. Sor stood in the hallway on the other side, asking for permission to come in. The voice he spoke with now would have been anxious, but Thisbe was just glad he finally came. She threw the door open and saw the Duke, but his face wasn't cold at all. Sor just said he came to check on her, knowing how exhausting the selection process was. And when he added it was just his duty, Thisbe realized she jumped to conclusions. Still, she told him that his visit made her feel a lot better. Then a few seconds of silence hung between them, and the princess noticed that loaded look of his again. Sor explained again that being around her would only cause her trouble, because she's just too radiant, and he's a really messed up guy. The girl started to feel lost, but there was truth in his words. No matter how hard he tries, his past mistakes will always haunt him. Still, Thisbe's choice is her responsibility, and she alone is accountable for it. And she wants Sor to feel the weight of that killing too, to pay for what he's done. Another silence fell, and then Salvatore stepped over the threshold of her room. He said her name aloud and leaned in, and she, thinking he wanted a hug, wrapped her arms around his back. But feeling something wet, she looked at her hand and saw blood. There are a few ways he could have gotten hurt. An attack, an accident, or maybe Sor decided to, check out early. The girl was scared he'd decided to solve her problems that way, and she'd have to figure it all out.